Chapter 468. 6th of March. You must be cautious. If there are any special circumstances, you must seek Mage Cassin's opinion. How old are you? You should control yourself when it comes to women. No matter how cunning Count Milner was, he was still a father in front of his son. Like all fathers, he did not forget to repeat many things before he left. Sienna, on the other hand, was much more mature than his young and frivolous peers. He kept nodding and making promises like a good son obeying his father's wishes. All right. Come back early. I hope you can gain some experience and see how the nobles handle things. If there are any inadequacies, think about what you would do if you were in their shoes. Would you be able to do a better job? Count Milner waved his hand. I shall not nag any more. Sienna bowed respectfully and boarded a luxuriously decorated and spacious carriage under his father's watchful eyes. A middle-aged man came over and greeted Milner. He then pulled the cloak that covered his robe and followed the team. This was Mage Cassin, who was trained by the Milner family. He had the title of Intermediate Mage in the Sorcerer Association. According to Roddy's standards, this mage was currently at level 17 and was a standard elementalist. In this era where there were very few mages, he was definitely an uncrowned noble. Hence, he did not show any signs of humility when facing Milner. It was as if he was just helping a friend along the way. Sienna sat in the carriage obediently until the carriage left the city gate. However, when they arrived at the first town outside the city, a few young ladies who had been arranged to wait there boarded the young master's carriage. All the servants in the carriage pretended not to see them. Perhaps the only one who disagreed with this was Mage Cassin. He would occasionally look at the swaying carriage in front of him that would occasionally pant or growl. He pursed his lips and continued to read those difficult spell books with his head lowered. More than 1,000 miles away, the orcs on the Nehemia grassland also began to pack their luggage and get ready for a long journey. The beastmen lacked resources, so they could leave at any time. The nomads were already used to living without a fixed place to live, so it took less than a day for the 600 wolf riders to be ready from the moment Goddard gave the order. Warlord Goddard, if we suddenly leave like this, how will we explain this to Great Chief Sauron? Just wait here. When his people come to me, tell him that I just left. Remember, you must tell him that I'm going to do a preliminary investigation. Got it? Yes. Warlord Goddard. The scorching sun shone on the sturdy beastman's body. Goddard looked back at his eager soldiers with a cruel glint in his eyes. Solon would only start preparing for the war in April, but Goddard's departure this time was not just for advance reconnaissance. He gently stroked the battle axe with his fingers and jumped on his huge wolf. Then, he took out a beautifully drawn map from his pocket. He silently recited the positioning mantra that he had learned recently. After confirming his current location, he pointed to the east and ordered, "Warriors, let us become a nightmare that will make humans tremble. Kill, kill, kill. Long live Goddard. Kill everything." The slogans were not uniform, but their desire to kill was more intense than ever. "We've only been back for a month, and now we're going out again." Camilla looked at Roddy, who had changed into a new set of leather armor. Her eyes flickered. "I wanted to tell you to be careful, but looking at the situation now, there's really nothing to worry about." "Look at what you said. It's never a bad thing to be careful." Roddy smiled. He always felt that Camilla's tone was a little strange. It inexplicably reminded him of the wives who sent their husbands to the front line, but this was just an illusion. When Akasha's figure appeared outside the door, Camilla had already regained her usual calm appearance. She coughed lightly and continued, "The upgrade of the city's defense is on the agenda now? I always feel that this part of the funding is better used for development in other areas. Listen to me, it's better to be prepared." Seeing that Roddy had no room to refuse, Camilla no longer argued as before. In this winter, Roddy had used his actions to prove that his decision was correct, so this strong woman had gradually become accustomed to supporting his decision. "Brother Roddy!" Naifei shouted outside the house. She rushed into the house like a gust of wind. Before she had time to say anything, she was pulled by her mother and reprimanded. "Pay attention to your image. How can you run around here?" Roddy hurriedly pulled Camilla. The spoiled Naifei did not care what her mother said. She hugged Roddy's waist and shouted, "I want to go too! Brother Roddy, you promised me." Hey. I didn't promise you directly. I don't care. Naifei shook Roddy hard. "You said that there would be no danger this time. I'm almost bored to death in the city. Can you take me with you?" In the past, Naifei did not dare to contradict her mother. However, now that she had a backer, her ability to act coquettishly broke through the sky. Akasha, who was at the side, was stunned. If she did not know better, she would definitely think that Naifei was Roddy's daughter. Camilla was originally firmly against Naifei going out, but if she was allowed to go with Roddy, then Camilla would be 100 times more relieved. The Castellan definitely raised her like a princess. She would not let her suffer even the slightest grievance. "I'm not just going out to play. Some things are quite dangerous. Don't lie to me. I heard you said that everything is prepared. You won't lie to me, right?" This. "I promise I won't run around. I promise I won't cause any trouble. I'll just stay by your side, okay? Can't I not leave you at night when I sleep?" "Naifei, what are you talking about?" Seeing that Naifei was really going all out, Camilla also looked at Roddy as if asking for help. Of course, she knew that she could not blindly suppress Naifei's request. As an arcanist, the most important thing to do was to travel around and improve her level in practice. Now that there was someone she could trust, if she still did not agree to Naifei's request, there might really be an irreconcilable conflict between mother and daughter. Roddy observed her expression and naturally understood that she had agreed. However, he still put on a troubled expression and said, "Then, you have to promise not to act alone, do you hear me?" I promise. Naifei shouted excitedly. But before she finished her words, she saw Roddy turned around and walked to the storage room next to him. Not long after, he came back with a pile of things. "I was going to give you this robe for your birthday, but this time, you must wear it at all times." "Brother Roddy, I didn't tell you about my birthday." I didn't have time to ask." Roddy was nervous. He really did not ask anyone about Naifei's birthday, because it was something that could never be erased from his memory. But now, he could only quickly find an excuse to cover up his lie. "I asked the tailor to make this robe a few days ago. There are rune crystals inlaid on it. The replacement runes are in this bag." Roddy did not say that the material of the robe was a thin layer of dragon skin that had been tanned by the High Elves. It was the softest area on the inside of the dragon's abdomen. For ventilation, the robe was pieced together in pieces. Ordinary people would mistake it for cloth if they did not look closely. But Camilla could tell what the material was at a glance. She could not help but sigh in her heart. Perhaps even she could not bear to let her daughter wear such an expensive robe. Just how much does Roddy want to spoil her? An inexplicable jealousy welled up again. Camilla bit her lips a few times to suppress it. However, when she saw that Roddy had given her another 4 or 5 magical props to hang on her body, she still covered her slightly twitching cheek. "Roddy, isn't this a little too much?" No. Didn't the Arcanists in the High Elves era do this? Hey. He wanted to arm Naifei to the teeth, but Camilla did not want to see him spoil Naifei like this. She sent her daughter away to pack her luggage. The final confirmed departure list was only 4 people: Roddy, Naifei, Natha, and Akasha. Rugcat would still stay in the city to train the new soldiers, and the rest of the private soldiers would be gathered by Sodeler. But when they were about to leave, Camilla still felt that it was not safe with so few people. She even took the initiative to ask Akasha to bring some undead soldiers as guards. Akasha and Camilla rarely talked to each other. One could even say that they did not see eye to eye. But this would not lead to prejudice, especially when it came to safety. Akasha also knew that Camilla was reminding her out of kindness, but when she mentioned the undead soldiers, her expression was a little strange. Roddy did not notice this. He thought about how his team of nearly 100 people could still be attacked in the Bogdo parish. He did not dare to be careless, so he said, "Let's bring 100 people and choose the strongest ones. When the time comes, it will be fine as long as they don't show up in front of others." So when they left Elson City, Roddy's team immediately seemed to have grown a lot stronger. Not only did he bring people with him on this trip, but he also brought along his 3 fools, magic pets. The loss he suffered in King Solomon's treasure made him deeply understand the importance of magic pets. Therefore, at this moment, the Train King, who was carrying all the supplies and pulling the luxurious carriage, was walking in front. The Nokia was thrown into the luggage pile, and the Zelda duck was squealing foolishly as it circled above the team. Just like that, the team to Da Vinci's territory set off. Thank you for the monthly votes. Vista, Dead Sword, Dark Mage, DLGenexlo88XX. Thank you for the support. Enhanced Barrett, Bookfriend 1407081, DLGenexlo88XX. Chapter 469. The 16th of March. The snow had gradually melted due to the severe cold. Heading west from Ifta, the situation was slightly better than in the east. Because Lord Sally had resisted the pressure and stabilized the prices of goods, the spring plowing had begun normally. Even the cold-resistant oats that had been sown earlier could be harvested for the first time. If the situation was good, Ifta's harvest this year should not be affected. Looking at the scene before her, Sally heaved a sigh of relief in the carriage. "Sister Sally, which town are we going to rest in next?" Naifei's voice sounded from the side, causing the Duke to turn around with a smile. "We've just set off and you're already thinking of the next place? I think you've been locked up by that fellow Roddy for too long." "Of course not. If it wasn't for Brother Roddy, I wouldn't have been able to come out this time." "You only know how to speak up for him, TSK." "That's right." Chatter echoed in the carriage. The convoy that had set off from Hollier was slowly moving on the main road to Da Vinci's territory. 3 days ago, Roddy had met up with Lord Payer and Lord Sodeler. Then, he brought his men and horses to Hollier and set off with Sally. At this moment, there were more than 500 people in the convoy, including guards of honor, private soldiers, logistics, and various servants. It was a majestic sight. In 2 months, Sodeler had trained this batch of barbarian recruits to have a slightly different aura. The large armor that was temporarily custom-made was installed on the carriages, and these burly soldiers were no longer as sloppy as before when they walked. For the sake of neatness, their originally thick hair was shaved bald, and their beards were also styled. From a distance, they looked very imposing. The deterrent force of the skinheads was still very shocking. On the other hand, the 73 veterans were the complete opposite. Because they had experienced too many bloody battles, these elites that Roddy had personally trained now had an indescribable air of arrogance. They rode on their horses lazily, most of them not even holding on to the reins, relying purely on their bodies to move forward. Although their postures were relaxed, the troops were still orderly. This kind of ability could only be seen by those who knew the ropes, and in the eyes of most people, they were completely auxiliary soldiers attached to the back of the troops. As the military commander, Sodeler rode in the middle of the group, but his eyes were always looking into the distance, not saying a word. These days, even Erwin could see that there was something wrong with the commander's silence. Sometimes, he even had to listen to a soldier's report twice before he could react. It was obvious that he had something on his mind. That was why Erwin, who was Roddy's bodyguard, purposely ran to Roddy's carriage and told him about it. However, he found that his worries were in vain. Roddy waved his hand and smiled. You don't have to worry about this. Just follow the team. Soddler will be fine. Erwin was too lazy to think about it. He rubbed his bald head, picked up the steel tower shield, and ran away. Closing the window, Roddy no longer had the smile from before. Everyone has a story behind them. For Soddler to be able to endure for so many years, I'm afraid his heart must have been suppressed. To be honest, if you want me to settle the score with the Pope of the Viper Cross, I'll also feel a little lost. Akasha, who was sitting opposite Roddy, said as she poured him a hot milk tea. It was probably difficult for commoners to drink such an expensive drink, but now that he had become a baron, Roddy did not reject these so-called luxurious customs. After all, in the era he lived in, commoners had a quality of life that most nobles could not even envy. I've really made things difficult for you this time. He suddenly sighed. Because she and Sally had always been a little against each other, and now that the two of them were in the same team, it was even more awkward. I've said it many times, this is the path I chose. Why are you always feeling guilty? Akasha's voice was gentle, and her smile was tranquil. Roddy knew that some things could not be forced, and some wishful thinking could only be wishful thinking in the end. So he simply changed the topic. Those undead are following in the forest. Can you guarantee that you won't lose control? No problem. In fact, I don't have to be distracted giving them orders. Basically, I just tell them to follow quietly. It's not as complicated as you think. Really? I really don't know much about this. Roddy nodded, but he had some doubts in his heart. The followers of the necromancer in the game could not be controlled so easily, and summoning the undead with the ability to carry out their own orders was something that only high-level mages could do. Perhaps it was because the level of the scroll itself was high? Tycoon and really spared no expense. The long journey in the carriage was extremely boring. After Akasha and Roddy chatted for a while, they each held a book to read. But when the convoy was resting at noon, there was a sudden knock on the door. Roddy, there's something I want to discuss with you. Sally spoke in a completely businesslike tone. Obviously, she knew that Akasha was in the carriage. The little priest sitting next to Roddy pursed her lips and muttered, "Why are they checking on me?" She stood up and said, "Then I'll go take a walk first. I've been staying here for a long time, and I should exercise my body." Roddy did not know how to solve the conflict between the two, so he nodded and did not say anything. He just gently held Akasha's hand before she left the carriage. This made Akasha's stiff face soften a lot. When she got off the carriage, she looked at Sally, who was standing there. Both of them just smiled and nodded, but did not say anything. But when Akasha saw that Naife was also there, she smiled and chatted with her for a while. Then she turned around and left. Naife immediately noticed the subtle atmosphere in the air. She blinked her eyes and did not say anything. At this time, Sally, like a victorious little lion, got into the carriage. As soon as she got in, she snorted and pouted. Lord Baron's life is very carefree. With someone taking care of him, the journey is not boring at all. All right, don't play this game with me. Roddy did not know whether to laugh or cry. He then leaned to the side. He originally wanted to let Sally sit next to him, but Naife directly sat there and said with a smile, "Uncle Erwin is so amazing. I saw him go to the forest and hunt a wild boar. Now he is roasting it. He is good at hunting. If you are hungry, I'll ask someone to bring some for you." Sally was forced to sit opposite to Roddy. But she was too embarrassed to ask Naife to change the seat, so she changed the topic. "The Cardinal has replied to me. He trusts your judgment very much." Roddy was not surprised. He nodded and then looked at Sally. Obviously, it meant, "What else do you want to say?" Sally did not have anything to say. She was just unhappy that Akasha had been accompanying Roddy all the time. So she deliberately came to occupy his time for a while. But now that Naife was next to her, she could not do anything too intimate. Otherwise, she would have locked the carriage door and jumped into Roddy's arms. That knife, the wild boar that Erwin roasted looks good. Do you want to get some for us to eat together? Sure, sure. Knife nodded and walked out of the door. Sally was happy. When she was about to get up and sit next to Roddy, she saw Knife ran back in the blink of an eye. I told Uncle John. He said he will bring it here immediately. Although that was what she said, the look in her eyes said, "Don't even think about scaring me away." Sally really wanted to pinch her. This little girl was usually a big sister, but at the critical moment, she did not hesitate to sell out her teammate. But after all, she was just a child, so Sally did not take it seriously. She continued to chat with Roddy about the Da Vinci territory. At this time, Sally sighed and said, "I was going to give you the Fuser silver mine as a gift. But in the end, such a thing happened." She did not mention her intention for the mine in the previous letter. Now that she mentioned it, Roddy raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Fuser silver mine? Are you talking about the Coat Mountains?" "There is only one mountain in the Da Vinci territory. Where else could it be?" Sally rolled her eyes at him. Her coquettish expression inexplicably made Roddy's throat dry. He tried to pull himself together and said in a low voice, "Is this the reason why they want to deal with you?" "Almost. But it's just a matter of time. It's just a little earlier." "How do you plan to deal with it?" "I don't know. It depends on whether you want the mine or not. At most, we'll just shed all pretense of cordiality." Sally said it casually, but if she really wanted to be stubborn, the price she would have to pay would not be small. Roddy knew that she would definitely do anything for him. Not to mention offending the nobles, it would not be a problem for her to go against the royal family. But in his eyes, there was another way to resolve this matter. "It's fine. When the time comes, you will listen to me." He mumbled a few words, but Sally could not get any answers from him. She knew that Roddy was keeping her in suspense, so she humphed and did not ask any more. After a while, Butler John brought lunch, and the three of them ate to their heart's content in the carriage. Since Sally was Duke, she naturally would not stay here for long. So after lunch, she got up and left. Roddy hurriedly got off the carriage to send her off, but when he returned, his face was grimacing in pain. Obviously, he had been ruthlessly pinched by Sally. When they sat down again, there were only two people left in the carriage, Roddy and Knife. Little Fox was quite proud at this moment. "They are nothing. Now I am the only one left. Brother Roddy, I am sleepy." "Ah? Then sleep for a while. I will get someone to bring a blanket." Roddy naturally did not feel that this request was too much. Moreover, Knife liked to stay in this carriage for the past few days. "I will cover you. It is really tiring to sit in the carriage." Knife did not let him go. She said as she sat next to Roddy, deliberately using her little butt to push him, "There is no pillow here. Let me sleep next to you, okay?" Roddy was a little hesitant. Can't the soft cushion opposite him be a pillow? "Brother Roddy." Okay. Roddy could not resist Knife's coquettish behavior. If he wanted to be a father, he would definitely spoil his child. Little Loli smiled and put her head on Roddy's leg, saying aloud, "I will sleep for a while. If Brother Roddy's leg is numb, just call me." "It's okay." Roddy carefully covered her with the blanket and then tucked in the corner. This made Knife feel inexplicably at ease. She did not want to sleep at first, she just wanted to be closer to Roddy. But because she was relaxed, she actually fell asleep in a few minutes. In the quiet carriage, Roddy was lost in thought as he looked at Knife, who was lying in his arms. The little fox had her eyes closed and looked very gentle. Her immature face was developing into that of an eccentric little beauty. Roddy was in a daze as his fingers unconsciously stroked her fiery red hair. Unconsciously, he recalled the scenes in his memories. The war of the beastmen, the burning village. The nightmare will not repeat itself. Roddy's eyes looked out of the window and whispered softly, Thank monthly votes. Tumglin, Inscriber, Book Friend 1506192358381113. Chapter 470. Just as the nobles of Efta were moving out for the spring hunt, the grasslands outside of Efta's borders were suddenly disturbed by the appearance of a team. The wolf cavalry ran across the soft meadow. After the 600 warriors had trekked for more than 300 kilometers, the dense grassland around them gradually became sparse. In the distance, they could already see the large expanse of greenery that belonged to the silent forest. Wisps of smoke drifted into the air, indicating the direction of the human village. Warlord, we're finally here. Riding a wolf was not as comfortable as riding a horse. Although the wolf riders were used to the swaying spines of the wolf, it did not mean that they were still full of energy after such a long journey. At this moment, all of them looked exhausted. Most of them were panting from exhaustion. Only a few of the elites looked normal. Goddard, on the other hand, did not even break a sweat. Wolf riders did not just need to ride on wolves. Exquisite techniques and control were the embodiment of strength. It was obvious that Warlord Goddard's reputation as the leader of a tribe with over 10,000 people was not undeserved. But after hearing his subordinate's words, he shook his head. We're here? No, this is not our destination. Why? Warlord Goddard, the human villages are right in front of us. As long as we charge forward, we can obtain a large amount of food as replenishment. The warlord's deputy clearly could not understand his superior's thoughts. Goddard did not explain anything to him. He only took out the map from his hide pocket and began to seriously compare the positions. The human patrols will appear in front of us in 2 hours. There are scouts in all 5 villages. The nearest fortress can replenish 3 platoons at any time to assist in the defense. Lines of information detailed the structure of the Efta territory's border defense in front of the warlord. Most importantly, it was written in the Orc Sabine language. The first line of defense of the human kingdom was no longer a secret in Goddard's eyes. These cunning humans. If we just charge forward without thinking, I'm afraid we will be held back by their army in less than 2 days. If we want to make further progress, we can only wait for Sauron's main force to catch up. How is that possible? The deputy beside him felt that the warlord was completely crazy. Fool! Do you really think these humans are like sheep waiting for you to slash at them? If that's the case, why were we forced to retreat to the other end of the grassland 70 years ago? Goddard was not a brute. He knew very well that not all humans were soft persimmons. Strategically, he looked down on them, and tactically, he valued them. In terms of military quality, Goddard was definitely an excellent commander. Listen to my orders. Everyone must depart to the south within an hour. We will bypass the defensive perimeter of this territory. Overseer, listen to me. Cut the crap. Goddard pointed at the seemingly peaceful Efta defense line. This is a huge trap. Whoever jumps in is a fool. I know everyone is thirsty and tired, but you can't relax yet. Follow me. We're not going to be scapegoats, we're going to plunder their richest city. He had killed the most nobles. There will be food and wine, blood and glory. Do you understand? Roar, kill them all. The troops quickly changed their direction. The 600 wolf riders were like a moving shadow on the grassland. In a flash, they disappeared from the sight of the Iferta defense line. March 25th. Baron Panini, there seems to be a lot of villages around the hunting ground. Is our safety guaranteed? In the Baron's mansion that had been decorated for the hunting activity, Count Balachi pointed at the territory sand table in the hall and asked. Ordinary nobles rarely had a sand table at home. However, Baron Panini was a famous general in the army of Emperor Kun 3 generations ago, so many military habits had been passed down. This sand table was deliberately placed in a conspicuous place to show off the glory of his ancestors. It was far more important to show off than to be practical. Safety? Count Balachi, you must be joking. This time, not to mention the soldiers provided by Count Milner, how many private soldiers do the 70 nobles have? I'm afraid it's not a problem for them to have more than 2,000 private soldiers. Are you still worried that someone dares to cause trouble? Viscount Balachi had always been timid. Hearing this, he finally let out a sigh of relief. He sighed and said, 8 years ago I was almost killed by bandit. So I'm a little sensitive about this. I heard that many untouchables have become bandits because of this harsh winter. I've always been worried. Lord Viscount is famous for his cautiousness. I know that, Viscount Henru said with a smile. Viscount Henru smiled as he spoke. He then pointed at the Cohen Mountains on the sand table. So far, we've almost finished arranging the manpower. The location of the Fuser silver mine has been confirmed. When it comes time to deal with that woman, it's up to you all to cooperate. Of course, at this time, there were 7 or 8 lords in the study. They were the main body of the alliance to fight against Sally. They had already reached an agreement on the issue of the mine. Now that they were gathered here, it seemed like a casual chat, but it was actually a pre-war mobilization. They did not have to wait for too long. At noon, the news that Sally and Duke's team had entered the territory came. These nobles looked at each other and smiled inexplicably. The main character is finally here. Ha, let us see this Lord Duke. Viscount Henru smiled as he followed the group of nobles out of the room. While the others were changing into formal attire and preparing to welcome the Duke, Viscount Henru gave an order to the commander of the private army in his bedroom. I heard that Rodi and Sodeler will also be there. Keep an eye on them and report their whereabouts to me at all times. The soldiers killed by Rodi would not let it go so easily. In Viscount Henru's eyes, this hunting party was not just a trap for Sally, but also a grave for Rodi. Balachi was a coward who cherished his life and dared not do such a thing openly. But Viscount Henru did not care. Whose territory did not fall on the bodies of others. After killing Rodi and Sodeler, it would be Titus, Wellington, and Ifta's territory. A large part of it would eventually fall into his hands. He still had a whole set of follow-up plans waiting to be implemented, but now was the time to do what needed to be done. After changing into a luxurious robe and a handmade round hat inlaid with exquisite jewels, Viscount Henru walked towards the door with a calm smile on his face. The convoy from Hollier slowly drove into the city of Pacaro in Da Vinci's territory. The 48 guards of honor who represented the status of the Duke, dressed in red, led the way in front. Behind them were the 2 Grand Knights Titus and Wellington, as well as their private soldiers. They were tightly escorting the luxurious carriage pulled by 4 white horses. The wolf head flag representing the Lucifron family fluttered in the wind, matching the pace of the soldiers. It did indeed give off a murderous aura. But there were only 300 people entering the city. Squeezed into the narrow street, they somehow seemed a little thin. When the carriage arrived in front of the Baron's mansion, the nobles with fake smiles on their faces had already formed a welcoming line. But unlike the usual welcoming lines, the 2 sides of the square in front of the mansion were filled with Viscount Henru and Count Balachi's private army. Each of them wore dazzling metal armor and pointed their spears at the sky. To the nobles, this was a naked demonstration. It could even be said that they didn't leave any room for negotiation. Sally, who had alighted from the carriage, also stopped in her tracks. Her expression instantly darkened. But she didn't show any unnecessary emotions. She just continued walking towards the group of sneering nobles. There was no one beside the female duke. Rumor had it that Baron Rodi, whom she had listed as a guest behind the curtain, was nowhere to be seen. The nobles snorted at this scene. Some even revealed a meaningful smile. As expected of a coward. Those meritorious deeds are so fierce. If they really come out, they'll know the truth. He doesn't even have the guts to show his face. This duke is also young. She's only 18 this year, right? Letting her take control of this territory, tsk. What a joke. Although the noble's discussion was hushed, it still couldn't be concealed on such an occasion. In particular, there were some words that Sally heard clearly. Of course, she knew that they were doing this on purpose, but at this time, she could only pretend that she didn't hear it. In this kind of situation, it was meaningless to shed all pretense of cordiality like a shrew. Baron Panini, Viscount Henru, and Count Bellacci stepped forward to greet Sally. They completely ignored the respectful bow that was supposed to be a sign of respect. The faces of the nobles behind them did not move at all. Their aggressiveness was self-evident. From beginning to end, Sally only nodded. She didn't even bother to say anything. After greeting them, she tactfully declined Baron Panini's invitation to arrange accommodation and food. She walked straight back to the carriage and headed for the manor that had been arranged beforehand. Since she has the guts to come, she should at least put on an act. Running away with her tail between her legs? I really overestimated her. Viscount Henru shook his head as he watched Duke's carriage leave. He didn't even try to hide the mockery in his words. Just as Sally left, news of the arrival of another convoy arrived. When they learned that it was Viscount Siena's convoy, a commotion immediately broke out among the nobles. The suzerains with young daughters hurriedly pulled them out as if they were showing off their jewelry. Their private soldiers were sent out to clear the path. The servants scattered the fresh flowers that they hadn't brought out earlier on the road. The three nobles in charge waited with folded arms, as if Siena was the most powerful suzerain in Iferta, when Viscount Siena, who was dressed in a bright red suit, stepped out of the carriage. There was a continuous stream of exclamations. This Viscount was handsome and tall. After his chestnut hair was tied up in a simple bun, he was the model of a perfect knight in the hearts of many young girls. At this time, with the servants arranged around him, the entire welcoming ceremony reached its climax. Tsk. It's as if he's seeing his own father. Not far away, Roddy, who was sitting in the carriage, watched this scene and revealed a cold smile. Thanks for the monthly votes, Mr. Sun-Chin, Old Wang of Luzhou, Rainy Peak. Thanks for the support, Loki Moon God. Chapter 471. While the nobles of the Da Vinci territory were busy welcoming Viscount Siena, the nobles participating in the hunting meet were also arriving one after another. As they were all feudal lords with some status, Baron Panini, who was the host of everything, would provide everyone with accommodations and food that matched their status as usual. Of course, this rule only applied to most of the nobles. But for unremarkable upstarts like Roddy and Sodeler, this arrangement was a blatant insult. One of Panini's stewards arrogantly brought Roddy and the others to a manor outside the city. He did not even bother to say a few words as he pointed and said, "Because there are a lot of lords coming this time, the two barons will have to inconvenience themselves to stay here. If you are dissatisfied with Baron Panini's arrangement, I can go back and report at any time." This manor was located at the edge of the Da Vinci forest, and it was obvious that it had been uninhabited for a long time. Who knew how many layers of dust had accumulated inside? And this place was actually shared by two barons of the kingdom. To the nobles, this was no longer as simple as a provocation. "Oh, thank you for your warm hospitality, Baron Panini." This butler was already prepared for the other party to fly into a rage, but Roddy's reaction was unexpected. This lord didn't seem to care at all and nodded to express his acceptance of this arrangement. Thus, all the mocking words that he had prepared beforehand were completely useless. He helplessly turned around and left. Roddy chuckled as he watched the butler leave. Then, he stood beside Sodeler and said, "See, these guys don't even know how to put on a show. It seems like there's still a lack of tacit understanding between them. If they wanted to get rid of him, they should have at least numbed them with good food and drinks." Now, it seemed that Roddy had thought too much. Sodeler, on the other hand, wasn't as open-minded as him. At this moment, his heart was filled with resentment and disappointment. How much trouble have we blocked for them these past 2 years? I didn't expect that in their eyes, all our hard work is still worthless. That's normal. They're the class that lives in the tower. Of course, they don't want others to enter the tower and take their resources. So, no matter how hard we work, they won't care. That's normal. The battle with the undead beastmen is too far away for them. Perhaps they will only understand the meaning of what we're doing when their blades and axes touch their bodies. Roddy patted him on the shoulder. All right, let's do our own thing. As for the Milner family, you have the final say. Sodeler nodded, his gaze as sharp as an eagle's. Speaking of which, although the manor was run down, it was still of a decent size. Under the cleaning of the servants and auxiliary soldiers, it would soon reach the standard of living. Roddy and Sodeler weren't people who loved to enjoy life. They had spent most of the past 2 years living in the wilderness, so living in the manor was really comfortable for them. 54 barbarians and 73 veterans set up a camp in the forest outside the manor, protecting the place layer by layer. The other 40 auxiliary soldiers busied themselves with the work, while the 100 undead and the gigantic Train King remained hidden in the forest, never showing their faces from beginning to end. The ranger Nada disappeared after the team entered the manor. There were some things that she would do even without Rhodey's orders. Akasha, on the other hand, calmly tidied up Rhodey's bed and asked the servants about the ingredients that could be used for the next few days. She was just like a housekeeper. After giving the order, Sodeler sat in front of the window in a daze. Naife had been staying in the carriage for a long time, so she was already tired and wanted to go to the city to play. Naturally, Roddy agreed. While Roddy and Naife were leisurely shopping in Picaro City, in the Da Vinci Forest, a heavily armed team had just stopped. The leader was a middle-aged man in his 40s. The staff in his hand was decorated with a cross, indicating that he was a clergyman. Behind him, there were more than 280 infantry, cavalry, scouts, and auxiliary soldiers, silently setting up a camp for rest. Lord Bishop, Viscount Siena has arrived in Picaro City. According to the plan, the hunting convention will be held in the hunting area in the front the day after tomorrow. Got it. The Viper Cross bishop named Frando rubbed his sore waist and complained in a low voice. For 3 targets, he actually organized nearly 300 people to surround and capture them. Really? He shook his head and took out the letter written by Viceroy Loier. Then, he took out the arrest warrant personally issued by the Pope. He looked at it again and sighed. The matter with the Viper Divine Staff is difficult to resolve. No wonder the Pope wants her dead. Louvel had promised Murnau that an 8-man special operation team could solve the problem, but what actually arrived in the Da Vinci territory was a professional army of nearly 300 people. Other than a team of clergymen and 2 squads of the Holy Army, there was also a team of mercenaries and 2 elemental mages. To be honest, the combat ability of this team far exceeded that of a noble's private army of the same number. The combination of healers, scouts, and firepower allowed them to do whatever they wanted in this area. So in essence, what Bishop Frando wanted to carry out this time was no longer an assassination, but a thorough war of annihilation. If this group of people were used to attack Picaro City, even Baron Panini would not be able to stop them. However, his superior had only set 3 targets for him. Frando did not think that Louvel or the Pope were fools, so he did not dare to be negligent. When the camp had just started to build, a series of orders were quickly passed down. Go investigate the ambush site and spread out the scouts. Give me all the information as soon as possible. Pay attention to the surrounding people who might appear. Once discovered, execute them on the spot. Don't let anyone discover our existence, understand? Yes, Lord Bishop. Time flew, and the next afternoon, Baron da Vinci's mansion began to host the opening banquet of the spring hunt. According to the plan, the entire hunt would last about 10 days, and the nobles who came here would have similar gatherings every night. To the nobles, banquets represented the expansion of their social circle, the exchange of interests, and even the bargaining chips for the development of their territories in the future. Of course, to some people, it was also a good time to hunt for beauties. The large back garden became the main venue, and there were at least 200 servants serving the nobles. The night wind was a little chilly, but the magic bonfire that Baron Panini had spent a lot of money to purchase made the venue as warm as spring. The noble ladies who wore ultra-low-cut dresses and occasionally revealed their slender legs when they walked were overjoyed. At this time, they were wandering around the venue with wine glasses in hand, waiting for the opportunity to find their Prince Charming. This is Baron Nicola of the Brutta territory. Nice to meet you, Baron Nicola. Sally, Duke is the most beautiful flower in Efta territory. As a lord, Sally could only feel her cheeks stiffening. All the nobles had to come and greet her according to the rules. This was a complete torture, but rules were rules. She did not have the ability to jump out of the circle and become a decision-maker. At this moment, she could only silently abide by everything. Even if many of these people had no respect for her. The noble circle was a very delicate place, and it was not an exaggeration to say that it was complicated. In the generation of Sally's father, Anmag, many families that had allied with each other were now hostile to each other. At the same time, many families that had fought against each other 20 years ago were now allied by marriage. They were so close that they could not even wear the same pant. This was the epitome of the human aristocratic ecosystem. There were no eternal friends or enemies, only eternal interests. Sally was both physically and mentally exhausted by these hypocritical fellows. When she found some time to look towards the corner of the venue, wanting to find that stupid blockhead, the corner of her mouth twitched slightly. She suddenly said, "That bastard," because she happened to see the scene of Roddy holding a glass of wine and chatting with a noblewoman. Unfortunately, the noble lady with an impressive figure had a deep cleavage. When she covered her mouth and chuckled, the trembling peaks could be seen clearly from afar. But because of the long line of people in front of her, Sally could not go over and push that flirtatious guy away. If this blockhead dares to flirt, I'll. Sally could not think of any ruthless moves at the moment. She was bored to death and could only continue to greet and chat with the nobles behind her with a stiff face. Obviously, Sally had some misunderstandings about Roddy's current situation. From any point of view, Roddy was not a playboy who liked to flirt around. Technological geeks were usually more introverted and had some resistance to talking to strangers. Even after experiencing so many things and becoming a noble of the kingdom, Roddy still did not like to take the initiative to talk to others, not to mention flirting with some sexy and coquettish noble lady. Roddy's suit today was deliberately made to be very conservative, and the color was not eye-catching. After walking around the venue, he heard comments like country bumpkin, no aesthetic sense, or like a farmer, so he was happy to have some peace and quiet in the corner. He was the only one who came to this banquet. Sodeler was afraid that he would draw his sword upon seeing Sienna, so he did not come. As for Akasha and Naife, Roddy felt that it was better not to let them come into contact with these ugly faces. However, the tree may desire peace, but the wind will not stop. Just as Roddy was holding a glass of fruit juice and spacing out, there was still someone who seemed to unintentionally lean towards Roddy. "They all say that you look like a country bumpkin, but I don't think so." The strong smell of perfume wafted towards him, and the words that followed made Roddy not know whether to laugh or cry. However, when he looked over, Roddy felt as if there were two lumps of white things in front of him. When he looked closely, he realized that it was the mountain of flesh that the other party had deliberately squeezed out with a corset. Her figure was indeed amazing, but Roddy was someone who had lived through the information age, so he had long been immune to this kind of figure. So, his expression did not change as he smiled and said, "Is that so? Then I have to thank you for your appreciation. You're really interesting." The other party laughed coquettishly, the small fan in her hand slightly covering her mouth, but the waves were abnormally turbulent with the movement of her body. "Thank you monthly votes. Forgotten City, Huawei 456, Huyan haha, Melalimli, Horadrim, no and no." Chapter 472. You're that Roddy, right? I'm Catherine of the Bolton family. There have been a lot of rumors about you in EFTA recently. They all say that you've become the guest of Sally and Duke. Hee, that's why those untouchables like to talk about it. I don't believe those messy stories. Roddy raised his eyebrows, not quite understanding what she was talking about. Don't look at me like that. I'm just interested in your past deeds. Well, do you have time to come to my manor for a good chat? As she spoke, she licked her lips with the tip of her tongue. Her fingers seemed to inadvertently brush across her chest, and her eyes were full of ambiguity. Roddy was so frightened that he swallowed his saliva. In fact, he was making a mountain out of a molehill. Most of the nobles in this era were very open-minded. At a banquet, young men and women who did not know each other would directly have a one-night stand. It was completely as common as drinking water and eating. However, after the surprise, Roddy only felt that it was a little funny. He shook his head and said, "Miss Catherine, I'm just a baron of a marginal territory. Those things are just rumors. Besides, I'm already engaged." He engaged, tsk. Catherine's smile suddenly turned cold. Not to mention engagement, after marriage, the nobles would have children all over the place and have all kinds of affairs to find women. Roddy's reason was really lousy. She opened her mouth and was about to continue, but seeing Roddy's impervious appearance, she snorted coldly and turned to walk away. Closing her delicate folding fan, Catherine took a few steps and came to the side of her close friends. These noble ladies, who were also wearing heavy makeup and lace corsets and long skirts, immediately surrounded her. "I didn't expect Catherine to be rejected one day. Isn't your big breasts invincible? Why is it useless against this country bumpkin? Go away, don't provoke me. If you're willing to bet, you must accept your loss. That set of jewelry is yours." It turned out that Catherine found Roddy entirely because of the bet between her and her sisters. To put it bluntly, these resentful women were too bored. They found it funny to see a different existence like Roddy, so they drew lots to choose someone to tease. "How is it? Tell me what it feels like." "He's a complete idiot. My breasts are about to fall out, but his eyes don't even blink. I really wonder if he likes men." Kathleen held up her proud capital and waved the small fan in her hand elegantly. "Those rumors are probably fake. This kind of person doesn't look like a noble at all. Look at his clothes, it's like he's afraid of people noticing him." Actually you're angry because you were rejected, right? It seems that our Catherine has never failed before. Come on, I didn't even use my full strength. These men are all like wild dogs. If you throw a little meat at them, they will come wagging their tails. Cut. The Bolton territory was one of the wealthier territories in the south of EFTA. As the daughter of the liege, Catherine had a higher status among the women. Therefore, no one made fun of her after she said that. After all, in the eyes of the nobles, Roddy's existence was nothing more than a joke. Just laugh, and you can throw it away. Of course, Roddy didn't know what the women were thinking. He was looking at the two liege lords who had just appeared in front of him. "Viscount Enru, Count Balachi," he greeted them warmly. "It's been a while since we last met. I was quite surprised by the gifts you gave me." He chuckled as if these two nobles had really given him some kind of treasure. Enru, who was about to say something sarcastic, suddenly had an interesting look on his face. He opened his mouth slightly and paused for a second. Then, he forced a smile and said, Baron Roddy must be joking. But this time, are you here to help Sally and Duke? I'm afraid Baron Roddy won't be able to help with the Cohen Mountains. This was a tit-for-tat answer. Everyone knew what the other party was here for. Some things didn't need to be explained. The Cohen Mountains? You mean the mountains next to the Da Vinci Forest? Does it have anything to do with this hunting expedition? Roddy looked at him with a puzzled expression. His rhetorical question immediately made Enru and Balachi look at each other. But after some thought, they realized that Roddy wasn't faking it. According to the common nobles, the fewer people who knew about the Fuser silver mine, the better. If Sally wanted to keep the Fuse silver mine to herself without telling Roddy, it would be normal for her to think whatever she wanted. I misspoke just now. My brain isn't working so well. The hunting expedition will begin tomorrow. I hope Baron Roddy will find something and enjoy the pleasure of hunting. The two of them didn't bother to exchange pleasantries. They left after throwing out this vague threat. Roddy looked at their backs and sneered. With your little exploration knowledge. TSK. He shook his head and sat down on an armchair. At the same time, on the Cohen Mountains, about 40 kilometers away from the meeting place, teams of slaves were digging deeper into the mines, accompanied by the shouts of the overseers. Jingle! As the time requested by Viscount Enru and the others was too short, the support for the mines, which should have taken half a year to complete, could only be hastily propped up with wood. Outside every mine, there was a lot of wood temporarily stacked up. Obviously, they were waiting for the hole to be dug deeper. The miners worked day and night, sifting out the rare thorium they excavated. Viscount Enru's butler recorded it on the accounts and carefully put it away. Under the illumination of the torches, the overseer's urging voices echoed in everyone's ears. The situation here was similar to the other mines in the kingdom. Everyone was repeating the monotonous work. But in a few of the mines, miners kept reporting strange things they encountered. Lord Overseer, the rock layer suddenly hardened. It's all black stone. It's hard for us to dig. Don't give me any F***king excuses. We've been digging for so many days, and you're telling me that we can't dig anything? But, crack. The cracking of the whip interrupted the dissatisfaction of the miners, and inadvertently covered the light flapping of the pin-tailed sand cone in the air. Nada, the wood elf, who was riding on the giant bird, tried her best to widen her eyes, and with the help of her talent of night vision, she tried her best to remember the locations of the mines marked by torches in her field of vision. Soon, the black shadow quietly returned to the brightly lit Picaro city. An auction? At the banquet, Sally frowned and looked at Viscount Enru in front of her. After the long greeting ceremony, the main event regarding the ownership of the Fuser silver mine was about to begin. But she did not expect that the nobles would choose to auction it off. Baron Panini believes that it will be difficult for him to fully exploit the resources of the mine, so he is willing to auction it off. Of course, the final auction price will still be paid to you as taxes. That sounded fair enough. But when she thought about it carefully, Sally's expression darkened. The information on her side was incomplete, and her funds were not as rich as the alliance of nobles. Just these two fatal flaws were enough to put her at an extreme disadvantage. Reject? Currently, Sally did not have the power to veto everything. If she were to say no, then this mine would definitely have no fate with her, and her goal of coming to the Da Vinci territory after expending so much effort would also be completely unachievable. So now, she could only bite the bullet and agree. She looked at Roddy as if asking for help. But the latter was talking to the wood elf at the edge of the banquet, seemingly unaware of Sally's predicament. In an hour, we will directly hold the auction here. Everyone will be watching from the side. The list of lords who are qualified to participate in the auction is here. I hope that Sally and Duke will have the expected harvest tonight. Viscount Enru handed over a piece of parchment. His smile was very sincere, but the mockery in his eyes could not be concealed. This made Sally very annoyed. The warm-up of the banquet was almost done. The music played by the band changed from a soothing concerto to a dance song. This meant that the entire banquet was about to enter the introduction stage. Usually, the introduction was initiated by the person with the highest status in the banquet. So when the music started, most people looked at the Lord of Efter. Sally was already in a bad mood. She could not help but frown when she felt the gazes around her. She had no interest in dancing at all. She was about to decline, but before she could say anything, Viscount Siena appeared in front of her. The heir of the most influential noble family in the south of the kingdom was elegant. In terms of image, he could be said to be superior to all the other young talents present. Obviously, it was not without reason that he was like a fish in water in the nobles' circle. Siena's appearance seemed to be what everyone expected. The other nobles who were ready to make a move immediately gave up on the idea of inviting Sally to dance. Siena looked around and gently adjusted his extremely eye-catching ice blue suit. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly with an undisguised smugness. Siena? Lexridge? Phone? Milner, may I have the honor of inviting you, the beautiful Lord of Efta, to join us in this grand banquet? Complicated and tongue-twisting words were a compulsory course for nobles to flatter each other. Siena had no resistance against a powerful and beautiful girl like Sally. From the first time he saw her, all kinds of thoughts had popped into his mind. However, at this moment, he looked completely like a gentleman. Not only did he not kiss her hand to express his goodwill, but he also bowed respectfully to her. To an ordinary noble lady, such an elegant young man would definitely be the first choice for a dance partner. But Siena knew that he would not succeed so easily. As expected, Sally shook her head. "I'm sorry, I'm not feeling too well. I won't be dancing today." Her reply was very stiff without any unnecessary modesty. But Siena was not shallow. The smile on his face did not change, and he immediately replied, "I'm afraid no one dares to say that they are qualified to dance for such a grand banquet, right? If I may be so bold, with the beauty and wisdom of Duke Sally, I'm afraid you are the only suzerain present here who is qualified to be the first suzerain." The silent coercion caused Sally to frown slightly. A foreign feudal lord's son had come to her territory to flaunt his prowess. This was no different from a slap in the face. However, looking at the other party's attitude, it seemed that a direct rejection would be of no use. This was the flaw of the young suzerain's lack of prestige. If Sally was half as powerful as her father, Angmar, she would not allow such a person to jump around in front of her now. The nobles present looked at the two of them with interest. No one planned to stop them. Obviously, everyone was waiting for Sally to make a fool of herself. But just as the two of them faced each other in silence, a sentence suddenly broke the silence. "Thank you for the monthly votes. Eternal Night to the Star, Naxos, Ethan_MO, Ink Ball, Guide 1. Firefly Time, meow meow. There are also a few who can't see it because they've been swiped. I'm really sorry, thank you for the support. Enhanced Barrett, June Ben, slow." Chapter 473. Excuse me. There's an urgent letter from Hollier City. Lord Duke, you'd better take a look at it. There was an uproar. This was not a situation that anyone could interfere in. Whoever spoiled Siena's plans would have to bear the brunt of his wrath. However, when the nobles saw who it was, they were collectively stunned, because it was Roddy who interrupted Siena. Sally did not feel relieved because of this. On the contrary, she was worried that Roddy had taken the initiative to attract the attention. However, Roddy did not seem to care about this at all. He ignored the nobles around him, and went straight to Sally before handing her a piece of parchment. Knight Titus just brought this over. He said it's an emergency. In fact, this was what Roddy had written on the spot based on Natha's report. Got it. Sally lowered her head to take a look and frowned. Her expression turned serious. Viscount Siena, on the other hand, no longer had the smile on his face. He knew that he wouldn't be able to get anything out of pressuring her. "I'm sorry, I still have some matters to attend to." The reason that Sally gave this time made it impossible for Siena to continue pestering her. Hence, he took a step back and smiled. "Lord Duke is very busy every day. It's rare for you to have time to attend to such matters. You're really our role model." Seeing Siena's attitude, the surrounding nobles understood his intentions. After that, no one brought up the matter of letting Sally lead the dance again. Everyone naturally began to look for partners to dance with. The atmosphere of the banquet also gradually calmed down as the music played. Sally took the opportunity to take the letter to the side to read it. As expected, Siena called out to Roddy, who was about to leave. "You must be the famous Baron Roddy of the Kingdom of Karen, right? Seeing is believing. I'm very interested in your deeds." Siena walked towards Roddy. He was slightly taller than Roddy, and his eyes were level when he spoke. He did not focus on Roddy at all. Roddy nodded. "Viscount Siena is very famous. I'm honored that you know my name. I've always heard that you have a close relationship with Sally and Duke. Now it seems that it's not a lie." Siena's voice was no longer as polite as before. It sounded more like an interrogation. Roddy calmed himself down and looked around casually. All the gazes around him were filled with schadenfreude. In their eyes, this unknown baron and the famous Siena were worlds apart. "I don't know if it's a lie or not. It all depends on Sally and Duke himself." "Heh. You don't want to admit defeat verbally. Who doesn't know about such matters in the kingdom? Do you really think you're a noble just because you're guarding a ruin?" Siena had no qualms about mocking Roddy. The other party had no backing or allies. The only person he had to worry about was Sally, and she was about to fall into an irrecoverable state. Yet, Siena dared to talk back to him. He was really courting death. "Is the meaning of being a noble only determined by the size of your territory?" Roddy asked unhurriedly. I know what you're going to say. You'd better keep those empty words about for the people and for the kingdom to deceive women." Siena shook his head. He suddenly felt that there was no point in continuing the conversation. After all, people wouldn't think that he was impressive if they saw him stepping on ants, right? That was why he did not wait for Roddy to say anything. He chuckled, turned around and walked away surrounded by a group of people. Roddy, who was ignored, pursed his lips and returned to his corner as though nothing had happened. While the others were chatting with each other about the dance, he began to gorge himself on the food. "Hey, Catherine, look at that country bumpkin. I bet he hasn't had any delicious food in his territory. Why? Since you're so interested in him, why don't you ask him out for a dance?" "Come on, I don't want to be laughed at, ha ha." The laughing girls went to invite others for a dance, while Catherine, who had just finished a dance, was about to take a break. She glanced at the country bumpkin, feeling disdainful and amused at the same time. How did such a guy who didn't fit in with the circle of nobles become a baron of the kingdom? In terms of looks, he's no match for those little fresh meats, let alone in terms of power. I really can't figure it out then. She felt a little angry. This trash that everyone shunned actually despised her just now. Damn it. The banquet proceeded slowly with the music. After an hour, the number of people on the dance floor gradually decreased. Not long after, a group of servants slowly pushed a huge sand table over. On the wooden table that was more than 6 meters in length and width, the external appearance of the Cohen mountain range was drawn according to the scale. There were nearly 20 mines marked on it, and it was displayed in front of everyone under the illumination of 6 magical crystals. The Fuser Silver Mine Auction, which was organized by the 13 Lords of Ifta, thus kicked off in a hurry and ostentatious manner. Baron Panini was the first to appear. After explaining the contents of the auction, he went straight to the point and showed more than 50 pieces of rare thorium to the nobles present. Of course, this was more to show off. Viscount Siena did not participate in the auction. He found an excellent vantage point and sat down. He squinted at Sally from afar, an unfathomable smile on his lips. There were always noble ladies who surrounded him to strike up a conversation, and he would talk to them politely. However, anyone with a discerning eye could see that this Viscount was obviously more interested in the Lord of Ifta. Why, are you just going to watch? Roddy was lowering his head to taste the special caviar from Mere River. Upon hearing the voice, he raised his head and found that it was the enchanting Miss Catherine who spoke. The auction does not require me to participate in the first place. Of course, I can only watch. He replied casually and continued to eat. Catherine originally did not want to pay attention to Roddy, but when she saw his calm expression, she felt a little impatient. She had the urge to jab at him. Tsk, seeing that the princess is in trouble, shouldn't a knight stand up for her? Is it really good for you to be a coward here? As she spoke, the first round of the auction had already begun. Obviously, these united nobles did not intend to give Sally any time to react. The starting price of the first batch of 10 silver mines is 50,000 gold coins. You can use the land title deed or other items to offset the price. Mining time. The guy who looked like a butler read out the rules of the auction. The lonely Sally looked pale among the nobles, and her eyes flickered. 65,000 gold coins, 72,000. Baron Dyke has obtained the ownership rights of the first silver mine. I hope you can dig out more wealth here. The second mine, accompanied by the exclamations of the surrounding nobles, the silver mine was sold at a very low price. Those with a bit of brain would know that this was actually a buyer who had planned this long ago. As for the one who had been schemed against the most, Duke Sally, she was already trembling with anger, and her face turned pale. She's only 18 years old. What's the point of bullying a little girl? Catherine gently swirled the red wine in her glass and continued to provoke Roddy. She wanted to see how this calm guy could hold on. But to her surprise, Roddy did not react at all. He put down the caviar and began to taste a freshly opened bottle of fruit wine. His eyes were unusually calm as he looked at the auction house. Even interesting. Not far away, Sally lost the bid for the first Fuser silver mine due to Viscount Unruh's extremely high bid. Duke's loss caused a chorus of boos. Of course, the boos were not much different from cheers. It seemed that everyone wanted to see her lose face in front of everyone. Panini and the others have planned this long ago. No matter how high the bid is, they will still be the ones to profit in the end. This duke is still too young. As a feudal lord, he actually ended up in such a lonely state. He's really digging his own grave. By now it was not just Catherine. The nobles around them who were whispering to each other had also begun to speak openly. Their voices were so loud that it was almost as if they were purposely letting Roddy hear them. Not far away, Viscount Siena politely asked Sally if she needed any financial help. However, Sally coldly waved her hand and rejected him. Tsk. I think it's not a bad thing for her to marry Viscount Siena directly if she's smart. At the very least, she can keep her status as a feudal lord and stabilize her power. Catherine seemed to be arguing with Roddy. She waved her fan and asked, "Do you think she's stupid? Why would she invest so much money and manpower at the border every day? What's the point of doing something so strenuous and unrewarding?" "Oh, you're right, Miss Catherine." Roddy finally seemed to be in the mood to talk. He picked up a cherry and stuffed it into his mouth. He said softly, "Indeed, no one wants to do something so strenuous and unrewarding. But what if something unimaginable happens? What a joke. I'm already tired of hearing such alarmist talk from the bards. You might be able to fool those farmers with that kind of argument." Catherine did not even try to hide her mockery. Her close friends who had been secretly watching them also laughed out loud. However, as they laughed, they found it hard to continue laughing, because Roddy was still eating the cherry. Furthermore, his gaze towards them was clearly filled with pity. "Congratulations, Duke, Sally. Although no thorium was found in this silver mine, it still has the highest yield of all the mines." The nobles in the distance clapped. However, they only managed to obtain 2 of the most unremarkable ordinary silver mines out of the 20 or so mines. To a duke, this kind of harvest could only be considered a humiliation. In other words, Viscount Unruh and the others' plan was very successful. The result was even better than what they had expected. Sally's face was filled with undisguised shame and anger. Her gloomy expression made her look like she was about to explode at any moment. After all the mines were announced to have been auctioned off, the Duke stood up and left. She left the venue under the mocking gazes of Panini and the others, as if she was fleeing. "What else do you have to say now?" Catherine said with a cold smile. However, she did not expect Roddy to lower his head and continue to eat a piece of cold steak. He replied softly, "Me? All I want to say is, everyone has to pay the price for their own choices." He smiled, then got up and left the hall. It seemed that he had left with that Duke. Still putting on an act at a time like this, tisk. Catherine pouted and left. She returned to the circle of her close friends with the attitude of a winner and continued to chat about those useless topics of gossip. The nobles at the banquet did not seem to care about the departure of their highest lord. On the contrary, their party had only just begun. "Thank you for the monthly votes. An egret crossing the river, solitary under the moonlight, beloved uncle. I remembered that Sword Emperor Lionhaken had also voted a few days ago. Quickly add them." Chapter 474. Sally's failure at the auction would probably make her the laughingstock of the kingdom for a long time to come. Those who left the auction in a drunken stupor at midnight were still talking about how she had made a fool of herself under Viscount Unruh's schemes. Some of the nobles who had been watching from the sidelines now made their own decisions based on Sally's weakness. Everyone had a common understanding. The power structure of the Ifta territory was about to change. Viscount Unruh, Count Balachi, and Count Panini partied the entire night. Sienna, who had his eyes on Sally, didn't forget to send someone to the Duke's temporary manor to greet him. Of course, he didn't want to use such methods to woo Sally. The Viscount's plan was very thorough. His father and the Viper Cross were discussing how to teach Sally a lesson, and after they were done, he would naturally use the opportunity of saving the damsel in distress to enter her life. So, a good impression was built up step by step. When Sally recognized his strengths, wouldn't everything be easy? Sienna, who considered himself a lover, was looking forward to this. After learning that the Viper Cross operation team had arrived and everything was going according to plan, he hugged a noblewoman he had met at a ball and returned to his manor with a smug expression. After a night of intense sex, he fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, the nobles who had gotten drunk the night before woke up one after another. The main purpose of the hunting meet was naturally to enjoy the pleasure of hunting in the forest. To most nobles, carrying weapons and wearing leather armor was the best opportunity to show off their charm in front of women. Thus, after washing up, these pot-bellied nobles put on their richly decorated leather armor with the help of their servants. After sucking in their bellies, they mounted their horses and puffed out their chests like proud roosters under the escort of their private soldiers. The edge of the Da Vinci Forest was only 5 kilometers away from Picaro City. The nobles knew that this wasn't a hunting meet for show, so they had made ample preparations. Thus, at noon, the entrance to the hunting grounds was already in a hubbub from the barking of hounds. At this moment, the private soldiers seemed to exist to show off and set off the identity of their masters. Their neat and gorgeous equipment, the family emblems on the fluttering flags, and even the hunting bows, long swords, and leather armor on their bodies became the target of comparison. In this aspect, Viscount Sienna came out on top again. With the support of the royal family, the Milner family was able to get many things that the nobles dreamed of. At this moment, the mithril light armor worn by these private soldiers had completely become an existence that looked down on everyone present. This kind of armor had stronger defensive capabilities than leather armor and was light in weight. Although it could not compare to real heavy armor made from wrought iron, because of the precious material, very few people could afford to wear it. The mithril armor of lesser nobles could be passed down as a family heirloom, but in Siena, it was only standard equipment for servants. I've heard that Viscount Senna is very talented in archery at such a young age. When people talk about hunting skills in the Bergen estate, who wouldn't mention a good lad from the Milner family? This time, you have to leave some face for us old fellows. Not at all. How can archery be enough for hunting? I'm not worthy of your attention at all. Words of flattery could be heard one after another. The grand lords had their own circle, and the lesser lords had their own circle. However, everyone would look to the side from time to time. They were all wondering if the young duke could withstand the blow from last night. To some people's disappointment, Sally did not have stage fright today. Instead, she appeared in front of everyone in hunting clothes. After changing into a set of gray and white leather armor, she looked extremely imposing. Her heroic aura that ordinary women couldn't compare to was on full display. Not only did Sienna secretly gulp a few times, but the noble ladies who were still in their long dresses and waiting outside the forest were also filled with envy. Sister Sally is so beautiful today. Nephi, who was beside Roddy, exclaimed. At this moment, she was riding on a gentle pack horse, and Erwin was holding the reins. Although the little girl was young, her attire made her look unique. It was not that these nobles did not have mages with them, but they could not find such a young and beautiful one. I think you should pull up your hood, or else there will be a queue of people coming to hit on you. Roddy pointed to the distance, and there were indeed many people pointing at him. Annoying! Brother Roddy likes to make fun of me. Although she said that, Nephi's face was slightly red. She obediently pulled up her hood to cover her red hair and half of her face, and obediently followed beside Roddy. Since Sally had to give a speech before the hunt began, she was placed in the middle of the group of nobles. Beside her were Titus and Knight Wellington. There were a total of 40 private soldiers in the group, with 3 hunting hounds in front of them. Roddy and Sodeler each brought more than 30 subordinates with them. Their appearance was like heaven and earth compared to the nobles' private soldiers who had deliberately dressed up. Because they were all warriors who had been through actual combat, these guys had never paid attention to beauty. Their swords, bows, arrows, and even the posture of holding the reins were all long-term combat habit. Unlike these people, they had never thought about how to position their weapons and how to coordinate the patterns. Compared to them, they were completely miscellaneous soldiers. This guy, I'm really oversensitive. Viscount Henru, who had been staring at them all this time, sighed. Viscount Henru, who had been watching the battle from the beginning, sighed. He had thought that Roddy would be a difficult opponent to deal with, but from the looks of it, there was nothing to worry about. No matter how he looked at it, those private soldiers looked weak. Their equipment was not neat, and the team was not in formation. His failure last time was probably because those refugees were too weak. With this thought in mind, he turned to the commander of the private soldiers and gave an order: find a secluded place in the forest later and clean up all traces. Yes, my lord. After the commander left quietly, Count Balachi rode to his side leisurely. Viscount Henru, did you have a good night? I'm getting old and can't take the tossing and turning anymore. I'm a little tired now. Haha, the matter of the silver mine is settled. I think you're more than 10 years younger now. That's ridiculous. Now IFTA has opened its doors to us. How are we going to clean it up in the future? As they talked about what happened last night, the 2 lords who benefited the most from it were still beaming with joy. The sense of accomplishment of disrupting EFTA's power structure from outside to inside was definitely more exciting than the thorium silver mine itself. However, just as they were discussing the use of the mine, a sudden report from their subordinate made them look at each other. "My lord, we just received news that a lot of people have gone missing at the Cohen mine." "Missing? What do you mean?" It's said that the 3rd, 6th, 7th, and 9th mines have been digging all night, but there was no report in the morning. When we went to check, we found that there was no one at the mines." Enru and Balachi looked at each other. "They all ran away?" "Lord Viscount, we have no way of confirming what happened." "What do you mean you have no way of confirming? There are at least 300 people in each mine, right?" Aye. "Lord Viscount, we really don't know what happened at the moment." Viscount Enru's expression darkened, but he also knew that it was pointless to ask such questions. The mine was only 15 kilometers away from here. The information they received now must be the first. As for what happened after that, there was no other way but to wait. "The mines you mentioned, I think, they are all Fusa silver mines, right?" Count Balachi asked, and the subordinate immediately gave an affirmative answer. Thus, the two lords' expressions instantly became solemn. Smart people did not believe in coincidences. They had used all kinds of schemes to trick Sally, and then the mines went wrong. Thinking about it, the Fuser silver mines that Sally did not bid for were the ones that went wrong. The other ordinary silver mines had no problems at all. The two lords immediately looked at Sally, who was riding on a horse not far away. She was currently looking at the forest with a calm expression, as if she was not affected by the failure of the auction last night. Could it be? No, that's impossible. She did not participate in this matter from the beginning to the end. The spies she sent before were all blocked by me. The people in the mine are all famous people from the nearby villages. There's no way that someone would sneak in and cause trouble. Besides, 4 mines and more than 1,000 people are gone just like that. If she was that capable, why would she need to put on an act? Although they suspected that Sally was involved in this matter, the two lords could not figure out what went wrong. They could only order their subordinates to find out more information and report back as soon as possible. "What about Panini? Don't tell him yet. Let's talk about it after today." Viscount Enru narrowed his eyes. He did not want to complicate his plan at this moment. Those who needed to be killed should be killed first. Other things could not be rushed. Soon, all the teams participating in the hunting fair had arrived. The host, Baron Panini, stepped forward to give a speech. It was mostly nonsense like thanking the guests. After that, there was a series of opening ceremonies of the hunting fair, including the decapitation of a deer, the firing of golden arrows, and other so-called good omens. Finally, after Sally and Duke announced that the hunt begins, all the teams split into groups and marched towards the Da Vinci forest. They completely disappeared into the dense forest within 10 minutes. Viscount Siena's team had the largest number of people and the most ostentatious. The middle-ranked mage beside him was very conspicuous. More than 60 private soldiers were equipped with shiny silver equipment. It looked more like a military parade than a hunt. Viscount Enru's eyes were sinister as he walked alone. Count Balachi and Baron Panini left side by side. The other 60 or so lords each brought their squires and hunting dogs with them. The total number of people was about 2,000. The hunt has finally begun. Sodeler urged his horse forward. He raised his head and looked at the sunlight that was gradually blocked by the forest. Monthly votes gratitude. What's the name? 12 words are not easy to express. Tang Ning, Sword Emperor Lionhaken? Rainy Day? Hey Tua? Burning Light Black? Yellow Rod? Shuyu 23440,373? Lu 2. Chapter 475. Half an hour later. Brother Roddy, is there really going to be a battle later? They were already deep into the Da Vinci forest, but the atmosphere was very relaxed. Although she knew what was going to happen, Naifei was not nervous at all. Instead, she took off her hood and looked around curiously. There will be, so you have to stay close to Akasha. I didn't leave you in the manor because you'll be safer with me. Do you understand? Don't run around. Oh, you've said it so many times. Of course I won't run around. I was wrong. Don't be angry. Roddy pretended to pat Naifei's head, and the little loli smiled happily. But in such a relaxed atmosphere, Roddy turned to Sodaler and said, "Prepare for battle. I don't want to make it real." Sodaler, who seemed to have changed into a different person after entering the forest, nodded and did not speak. He just raised his hand and made a gesture. In an instant, the originally loose team stopped moving forward. All the soldiers dismounted and began to help each other. They quickly put on the light armor in the backpacks on the horses. Their armor was not as shiny as Viscount Senna's. Instead, it had a dim greenish-gray luster. Ordinary people might think that it was rusty and old, but only knowledgeable magicians would recognize that it was the unique reflection of Baraton iron. The abandoned armor that Rhodey had taken from the ruins of the High Elves' Wagra city had been smelted again. In a year's time, 80 standard light cavalry armors had been made. This rare metal was even more precious than thorium. A set of armor only weighed 10 kilograms, so the soldiers could easily carry it in their backpack. But in terms of defense, it was many times stronger than the mithril armor that Viscount Senna's subordinates had. It should be known that this was the armor that only the royal guards of Wagra City were qualified to wear. Even in the era of the rich High Elves, it was still a rare resource. Wearing it would not be an exaggeration to say that the defense level would increase by 10 times. So in the blink of an eye, this hunting team had become a light cavalry unit that could charge at any time. On the chest armor of all the soldiers, there was an emblem of a blue dragon head pierced by a spear. In all epic stories, this mark meant only one thing: slaying the dragon. Dragon Spear Knights. Although this name is a bit cliché, dragon slaying is really not an exaggeration. Roddy nodded in satisfaction as he looked at the team that had taken on a new look. Sodaler took off his thick cloak, revealing his enchanted armor made from a mixture of dragon bones and rare thorium. He pointed at the emblem on his chest. Emperor Khan's emblem was also a dragon head. But on that dragon head of his, there isn't this lance. If there are any similarities, it's purely a coincidence. Roddy's lips curled up, but he didn't comment. Before this, these young scouts had never had a fixed banner and name, but today they finally had their own emblem and banner. Dragon Spear Knights, line up and march. Yes. The appearance of the knights who had finished changing their equipment was completely different from before. Although they were still moving silently, the sense of glory that filled their chests had already begun to rapidly gather, turn and advance towards the Mere River. This was the planned rendezvous point with Sally. After entering the forest, Sally had been surrounded by many other nobles, and now she had probably sent them away. I hope everything goes well. With a light tug on the reins, Roddy made the horse change direction. At the same time, a pin-tailed sand cone above his head whooshed across the sky, bringing with it a slight breeze. "Catherine, have you never thought of going in to take a look?" In the camp outside the Da Vinci Forest, the noble ladies who had stayed behind were gathered together and chatting. "A bunch of stinky men ordering us around, what's there to see?" Catherine didn't wear that sexy and revealing dress today, but a dark green short shirt that was similar to a hunting outfit. Paired with a pair of riding boots made by a master leatherworker, this wild and unrestrained beauty made the attendants who stayed behind couldn't help but cast sidelong glances at her. However, Catherine turned a blind eye to it. She was already used to the lustful gazes of men. Speaking of which, she had never seen a man who could look at her without revealing his inner desires. Oh, except for that annoying country bumpkin. Viscount Sienna is really handsome. I dare to bet that there's no noble in the kingdom who looks more like the knight in my dreams than him. Tisk, love-struck fool. If you really want to seduce him, just do it. What's the use of being lustful here? Catherine ran her hand through her long hair, feeling a little annoyed. She had thought that the Baron she had an appointment with last night would give her a pleasant night, but in the end, she found out that the Baron was just a silver spearhead. It ended hastily in a few minutes. What a disappointment! Gazing at the Da Vinci forest in front of the camp, Catherine felt that everyone was an eyesore today. When she recalled the silent mockery of that country bumpkin last night, she felt even angrier. She lifted her leg and kicked a pebble far away, as though Roddy was the pebble. A country bumpkin who only knows how to put on an act won't have a good ending. After cursing in her heart, Catherine realized that her actions were not very ladylike. She immediately retracted her bearing, and was about to find a place to sit down and rest. However, she soon discovered that a private soldier was running towards her with large strides. "Miss, I have urgent news to report to Master." The soldier was panting and sweating profusely. In the distance, the horse that he had just ridden was also drenched in sweat. It was obvious that he had galloped here from afar. Catherine was able to mix with a group of women as the big sister, not only because of her good figure. She only needed to glance at these details to determine that the other party had rushed over from Bolton's territory. Thus, she did not beat around the bush and said directly, "Father has just led a team into the hunting zone. Tell me what's the matter." That soldier took a long time to catch his breath and said in a low voice, "I just received news in the morning. Ailey Village, Brock Village, and Leven Town in the territory have been attacked." Attacked? Catherine's first reaction was neither fear nor excitement. Instead, there was only endless confusion. Who dares to attack these places? The guards there are not weak at all. I remember that knight Clade is in Leven Town, right? Clade was one of the strongest knights in the territory. In terms of strength, he was only below the two Grand Knights, Titus and Wellington. He was a valiant fellow who had advanced to the rank of Guardian Knight. He had once made a name for himself by crippling a group of over 30 bandits. Knight Clade's head was hung at the entrance of the town. The person who discovered it said that the entire town was— what happened to them? All dead, and not a single one of them survived. The same thing happened to those villages. A total of over 1,000 residents. There were no survivors. These words made Catherine shiver uncontrollably. This unprecedented situation made her feel a little helpless. She could not be blamed for being young. This was because no matter which lord it was, such a matter would probably cause a blank in their thinking. Did someone declare war on Bolton's territory? Or did some enemy take advantage of the situation and wanted to teach her family a lesson? Catherine was after all not a young boy. She tried her best to calm down and imagine all kinds of possibilities. However, no matter how she guessed, it was useless, because she had never heard of any nobles who would use such a shocking method to start a war. Nobles rarely killed commoners. Even if they caught hostile nobles, they would usually keep them alive to exchange for ransom. So what was going on? You? Wait for my father to come back and immediately tell him about this. It was useless for Catherine to be anxious now. Although she had a certain level of authority, she did not have the ability to make decisions on such a big matter. Is there any other information? Tell me in detail. No, there is no information. Butler Bram immediately sent me to report after receiving the news. He said that it is best for Sir Lord to immediately return to take charge of the situation. I am afraid that this matter will be difficult to settle with just a few orders. I know, but— Catherine took a deep breath and decisively waved her hand. You leave first, I will send someone to call him back now. Yes, Mississippi. Catherine knew that this was a serious matter. She immediately sent a group of soldiers into the Da Vinci forest to look for her father. Her hurried appearance made her other close friends a little strange. They all came over to ask about her well-being. Are you all right? Why do you look so pale? No, I'm fine. My stomach doesn't feel well when I wake up early. Maybe I didn't sleep well last night. He. What do you mean by not sleeping well? I'm afraid you didn't sleep well last night. Catherine was completely uninterested in responding to her close friend's teasing. She felt that her face was a little stiff, and her heart had a somewhat uncomfortable premonition. What is going on, indeed? No one wants to do things that are strenuous and unrewarding. But what if something unimaginable happens? This sentence suddenly appeared in her mind. Catherine, who was pacing back and forth, was startled. She then remembered that this was what that country bumpkin said at the banquet last night. The way he answered while eating cherries left a deep impression on Catherine. At that time, she was extremely disdainful of this saying, but now that she thought about it, wasn't what she was facing now the unimaginable thing? Catherine abruptly stopped in her tracks. She felt that even the warm sunlight could not bring her the slightest bit of warmth. However, just when she was at a loss, she suddenly heard a commotion. When she turned her head, she saw a group of troops suddenly rushing over from the nearby towns. Who is this? Which lord is late? The temperature in the forest was lower than outside. It was currently spring, and even if one was not in the mood to hunt, they could still see many animals traversing through their field of vision. Those wild rabbits, wild deer, and black wild boars would often be scared away from a distance. Roddy's troops silently advanced in the forest. As they knew that a battle was about to break out, everyone was actually secretly accumulating their aura. The experienced soldiers constantly moved their wrists and various joints, trying their best to warm up in the slightly cold air. However, before the troops arrived at their destination, an undisguised sound of hooves abruptly broke the original silence. Many figures appeared in their field of vision. At first, Roddy thought that there were other nobles chasing their prey, but when he saw the group of people in front of him with their swords unsheathed and fierce eyes, he realized that these people were probably not here to hunt. Where did they come from? Sodaler was astonished as well. These fellows were not the enemies he had expected. Thank you monthly votes. Lonely Floating Cloud, Dark Valley Mirror, Sword Emperor Lionhaken, Interdependence in Dreams, SS99, Na Mingyan, Huwei 456. Chapter 476. There were more than 100 enemies charging at them. Their equipment was excellent, but their horsemanship was terrible. Although the trees were sparse, many people still fell behind because they clumsily dodged the trees. Viscount Henru's private army commander was at the front of the group. After choosing a suitable place to charge, he decisively led everyone to launch an attack. Based on his years of combat experience, he believed that the less than 80 people in front of him would not be able to withstand the charge of these elite private soldiers. So when they were about 70 meters away, he raised his sword high and shouted confidently, "Kill everyone! Leave no one alive!" The soldiers who responded to him were even more murderous. But just as they shouted, "Kill! Kill! Kill!" then, the adjutant who was closer to the commander suddenly widened his eyes. That was because the head of the private army commander beside him had suddenly disappeared. 60 meters away, Roddy slowly put down his horn bow made of dragon bone and demonic core wood. He was not excited about killing the enemy leader with one arrow. He just frowned and looked at the unplanned enemies and ordered helplessly, "There's no time to wait. Send the signal and finish them quickly." Without waiting for Roddy to say anything, Sodaler immediately pulled out his guardian tooth, lined up in formation, and shouted, "Dragon Spear Knights, attack!" The sound of a sword being unsheathed instantly echoed through the forest. At the same time, a whistling arrow flew into the sky with a sharp whistle. In the next moment, Sodaler took the lead and led the team on their warhorses. This powerful Ghost Knight launched a unique skill of his advanced class, Group Charge. With the help of his battle aura, the knights behind him accelerated at the same time. It should have taken 10 seconds to complete the acceleration process, but it was shortened to 3 seconds. The first batch of 30 knights almost started to sprint at full speed in the blink of an eye. Among them, 26 had completed their advancement and became guardian knights like Titus. Their strength had changed dramatically. After the acceleration aura, group defense aura, and bravery aura overlapped, their attack, defense, speed, and explosive power were all greatly improved. Moreover, the battle aura that erupted from the skill caused the grass in front of him to fall to the ground. Roddy and Naife stayed behind with the reserve team. Akasha had already cast more than 10 types of divine incantations. At this moment, she was also sitting on the saddle, calmly looking forward. Because it was a battle within the forest, the lightly armored dragon knights did not carry any lances. However, this did not hinder their terrifying lethality. The average level of the private soldiers in the so-called fine armor was only level 11. They might be impressive in the Bogdo parish, but in front of the Dragon Spear Knights, who had advanced to level 2 and had an average base level of level 17, they were no different from wooden rakes on the drill ground. In less than 10 seconds, the two sides collided head-on. In the process of high-speed charging, the weapons relied on weight instead of sharpness to cause damage. When the knights used their battle aura and crossed paths with the enemy, the scattered flesh and blood showed the terrible consequences of the difference in strength. Viscount Enru's private soldiers had not experienced many frontal assaults at all. They had only shown off a few times when they were suppressing bandits or dealing with civilians. But when faced with the real trump card team that was full of vigor and superb horsemanship, no matter how hard these people brandished their weapons, they felt like bean sprouts in a gale. They had no power to resist at all. Most of their weapons missed because the Dragon Spear Knights were able to make reasonable judgments with their naked eyes at the moment of contact and block or dodge effectively. And when the two sides crossed each other, the Dragon Spear Knights would casually swing their longswords in their hands, and they would often separate an enemy's body from top to bottom. The veterans were no longer like the newbies who wanted to use all their strength for every strike. At this point in time, if they could use a fraction of their strength to defeat an enemy, they would definitely not use 20% of their strength. Because these knights were very clear about one thing: they could never place their hopes on the so-called reinforcements at any time. They could only rely on themselves. Therefore, their charge was invincible. More than 20 out of the 120 people in the team fell as if they had been shaved bald. Those fellows who had just finished their charge looked left and right, waiting for their orders to regroup. But it was only at this moment that they realized that their commander had already died on the way. The so-called morale had vanished into thin air in the face of such a devastating blow. And just as they were about to scatter and retreat, two other cavalry teams rushed out from the forest. When these private soldiers recognized who the newcomers were, they screamed in terror, "It's Titus! Wellington is here too! Run! Run!" When Sally received the signal from the whistling arrow, she immediately rushed over from the Mere River. At the same time, the barbarian soldiers who had been hiding earlier also rushed over, fully armed. At this point, there were about 170 troops gathered here. Viscount Enru's private soldiers who had tried to ambush Roddy were, without a doubt, surrounded like dumplings. A long-planned assassination had been resolved just like that. But after the battle that lasted for more than 20 minutes, the people who had gathered together did not look happy at all. After careful observation, it's Viscount Enru's men. Reckless, Roddy's face darkened. Although these enemies could not escape the fate of being executed, this unexpected ambush had directly disrupted his plans. His trump card had been exposed in advance, and the location of the battle had changed. Now, the troops were going to set up an ambush again? Big Brother Roddy, is this the end? Naife did not like bloody scenes. She twisted her buttocks and let the warhorse move closer to Rhodey's side. No, this is not the end, Naife. From now on, be more vigilant. Pay attention to any abnormalities in your surroundings. Roddy's serious words made Naife realize the severity of the situation. She nodded and glanced around. Suddenly, she said, "Big Brother Roddy, there seems to be something strange above us." "What?" Roddy was stunned for a moment. Thinking of Naife's ability, he immediately activated his demon hunter vision to take a look. No. I don't know if they have started. On the other side of the forest, Viscount Sienna was looking in a certain direction expectantly. He had little interest in hunting. At this moment, all he could think of was the heroic figure of Sally Duke. Compared to her, those mediocre women had really wasted half of his life. Those fanatics won't hurt her, will they? I don't want to see such a noble get hurt. As he sighed, he tried to ask Kaysen about it. However, Sienna's reply was also very simple. I don't know. Anything can happen on the battlefield. If possible, I don't recommend you to take the risk. Just wait patiently, young Master Sienna. As a family sorcerer, although Kaysen was self-conscious, he still had to think about his heir. However, Sienna had no interest in listening to his advice. He was completely focused on Sally. Then how should I intervene in this battle? After Roddy and Sodeler are killed? Then it's best if I knock Sally out. That way, I'll be the first person she sees when she wakes up. When that time comes, Kaysen was extremely annoyed by Sienna's hero rescuing the damsel in distress act. Therefore, after a few perfunctory words, he simply shut his mouth and did not say anything else. Just then, an injured reindeer galloped past them. Viscount Enru's party was in hot pursuit of it. Sienna had his men stop the reindeer while he rode his horse over to greet Enru. Then, they started chatting amiably. However, behind the seemingly lively exchange of pleasantries, both of them were secretly paying attention to the same direction. Viscount Enru, you truly live up to your name. I hope that you'll be the winner today. Viscount Sienna, don't be so humble. Halfway through their conversation, a blinding red light suddenly bloomed from afar. Kaboom! 4 to 5 seconds after everyone turned their heads to look, a deafening explosion ensued. It was not just one explosion, but 5 in a row. Sienna and Enru looked at each other with complicated expressions on their faces. They felt guilty and could not say anything for the time being. At the same time, they were also wondering about the meaning of the explosions. Only Kaysen, who was beside them, was shocked. 5 explosions. This elemental fluctuation, it's a meteor storm? After confirming that this spell was nicknamed the Battlefield Incinerator, he immediately realized that this was definitely something that only the Viper Cross would do. But it was supposed to be an assassination. Now that a spell comparable to a forbidden spell had been unleashed, how were they going to clean up this mess? As the echoes of the explosions gradually faded, a golden light flashed before everyone's eyes again. This time, it was not the sound of an explosion, but the sound of a holy prayer. When they looked up, Sienna and the others could vaguely see a huge shadow floating in the air through the gaps in the trees. It was a golden cross decorated with crossed roses. Holy Seal? Why would the Holy Seal of the Rose Cross appear here? The Holy Seal was a battlefield summoning order unique to the Church during the Holy War. Its appearance meant that the Rose Cross had troops nearby. After Kaysen's exclamation, Sienna, who was beside him, immediately realized that something was wrong. Although he was lustful, he was not the least bit slow when it came to business. At this moment, he was only stunned for half a second before he cursed, "Damn it! This is a trap." She knew it all along. ********* Monthly votes gratitude. EVCF 23, Shufas 15 ********, Shufas 2344037 Hanuk, Femute 1983, Gestapogod, Laughing the World 111, Kawashiro Kamashiro, Na Mingyen. Chapter 477. Sally, or rather, Roddy, already knew that the Viper Cross would attack him, and he also knew that it was the Milner family who was behind this. Count Milner did not know that his letters to and from Elson City had long been monitored by Roddy, so the contents of his negotiations with the Viper Cross had long been leaked. Those seemingly secretive actions had long become a joke. Roddy had made ample preparations for this, but when the attack really came, he realized that he had underestimated the viciousness of these cultists. When the violent fire elements rapidly gathered above his head, Roddy immediately realized that the power of this spell was probably no less than the dragon breath he had faced before. A strong sense of danger made him subconsciously pull out an ancient orange scroll and tear the seal on the spot. Through the Witcher's vision, he could see the fire elements in the sky rapidly condensing and shaping in less than a minute. When everyone could feel the scorching heat above their heads, giant fireballs were already crashing down. "Don't move!" When the meteor storm was about to destroy everything, Roddy shouted for the soldiers around him to not run. At the same time, an octagonal barrier suddenly rose above his head, blocking in front of the meteor. Following that, there were 5 loud bangs that could be heard throughout the entire Da Vinci territory. Bishop Frando held his breath slightly, his gaze fixed in front of him. When the bangs sounded, his heart that had been hanging in suspense finally felt like it had been lifted off the ground. Looking at the large patch of trees in front of him that was directly destroyed by the shockwave, there was only one sentence echoing in his heart. "This attack is in the bag." Meteor Storm was one of the high-level strategic spells that an elementalist could cast. It was not cast by the 2 elementalists who came to help this time, but was summoned by the scroll that the Pope handed over. After all, this was a level 6 spell, and the caster had to be at least a magister to cast it out of thin air. And at this time, in order to eliminate Sally, the Viper Cross had definitely used their trump card. Waves of heat blew in his face, but Frando did not move an inch on his horse. He narrowed his eyes as he looked ahead, and he couldn't help but feel pleased with himself. Compared to the stupidest encirclement method, he didn't let the soldiers run to the predetermined location and wait. Instead, he divided them into teams and waited for orders. With the help of Sienna's subordinates and the help of the mages, elemental sentries, they would confirm Sally's position before taking the initiative to attack. This method was especially effective against Sally, who didn't hide her whereabouts. What made him even more pleasantly surprised was that another unit had appeared out of nowhere and attacked Roddy first. Although they did not succeed, they managed to blow up the trump card that they had set up beforehand. They even managed to get Sally's unit to join them. This was an opportunity. There was only one meteorite storm scroll, and it was supposed to be used to end the battle with one strike. But now that there was such a good opportunity, Bishop Frando made a prompt decision and immediately used it to start the battle. "Next, we just need to clean up the battlefield. There are less than 200 of them. If this goes on, more than half of them will die. I reckon we just need to charge in and chop off their heads. Those targets probably won't even be left with their ashes." The red light in front of them had faded, and the black smoke had spread. This kind of straightforward attack greatly boosted the morale of the Viper Cross soldiers. They originally thought that they would have to fight a hard battle, but now they only had to harvest the heads to complete their mission. Many of them were already shouting the slogan, "The Viper God punishes everything." Half a minute after the spell took effect, Bishop Frando smirked and ordered the soldiers to pass on the order: "Infantry, advance. Cavalry, cover the flank. Mages, get into position and cover with spells." Compared to Viscount Henru's incompetent but arrogant private soldiers, the Viper Cross's troops could be called a combat force. 120 infantry were divided into 2 groups, with 50 cavalry advancing from the flank. From the beginning to the end, Not a single person was left behind or disrupted in formation. They began to slowly accelerate from 300 meters away, and when they were about 100 meters away, they collectively began to charge. At the same time, several fireballs flew out from the rear, landing directly on where Roddy and the others were, exploding into a ball of orange sparks amidst the thick smoke. The mages did not stay at the back, but were in the middle of the troops, constantly casting buff spells in all directions. Their footsteps were swift, and they were all mentally prepared for the enemy's corpses to litter the field. But when the sulfuric smell of smoke dissipated, a dazzling white light in front of them caused the soldiers in the front row to collectively stagger a step. How is this possible? The image of the enemy being utterly defeated and the ground littered with corpses did not appear at all. Instead, there were 2 rows of 2 meters tall soldiers in full metal armor. They were dressed like iron hedgehogs, and the giant tower shields in their hands were at least 4 meters tall. After the formation, it was as if they had formed a steel wall, and the troops behind them were also in an orderly formation. These people did not have any scars at all, and no matter how one looked at it, they did not seem to be injured at all. Roddy's extreme flame defense barrier scroll had completely offset the magic damage. At this time, other than some people at the edge of the team who were burned, they basically did not lose any combat power. This was the importance of strategic resources. When others used high-grade scrolls, Roddy would always have countermeasures at any time. If not for this batch of harvest from Solomon's treasure, perhaps this battle would not even need to fight before they were completely annihilated. The soldiers of the Viper Cross knew that it was useless to exclaim. The only thing they could do at this time was to grit their teeth and desperately collide with those tall and strong guys, and at the moment when both sides met the enemy, Sally also finished chanting the prayer. As she pointed the scepter in her hand to the sky, the huge golden holy seal suddenly appeared in the sky. Purify these heretical lunatics. Sally looked at the enemy in front of her, her tone full of anger. Catherine's heart was abnormally irritated. Just a quarter of an hour ago, the troops that rushed over from the nearby towns entered the forest before her eyes. This troop obviously did not belong to any of the lords, because Catherine recognized the Rose Cross emblem on the chest of the knights. What is the Holy War Army of the Rose Cross doing here? Not only her bosom friends and other nobles were also chattering, but no one could come up with a reliable explanation. The reason was that no one had received any news beforehand. The thing behind this was very thought-provoking. The nobles had always been very sensitive to information about the church, and any movement of the Rose Cross would definitely be known by the nobles. But this time, a troop of 180 suddenly appeared, and no one knew about it from start to end. With Catherine's political sense, it was likely that something big was going to happen. But right now, she had no interest in such gossip. She only wanted to see her father come out of the Da Vinci forest as soon as possible. The news of several villages being massacred was like a fishbone in her throat, and Catherine could not sit still. Come to think of it, in such a huge forest, her father would not tell others where he went. He would casually chase after a prey and change his direction at any time. If they only sent out a small team, there was no hope of finding him in a short period of time. Dorham, Catherine asked the butler beside her, how many soldiers are left here that can move? The butler heard her words and looked back. Miss, there should be 20. What is that? The butler who was counting the number of people suddenly froze, and Catherine also raised her head to follow his gaze. Then, she was also stunned on the spot. She was looking towards the west, where the few large villages and towns of the Da Vinci territory were located. At this moment, a few long trails of smoke suddenly appeared in the sky. Although the nobles did not know how to burn their own firewood, Catherine still knew that smoke was milky white, and the smoke in front of her was obviously the dense black smoke produced after something was burnt. 2 trails of black smoke had already drifted to a high altitude, and a new trail of black smoke was slowly rising closer to it. These lowly commoners just like to burn things randomly. The people around them also gradually noticed this. Catherine could hear her best friend grumbling, but she wasn't so optimistic at all. Bolton's territory was to the west, and if the few villages and towns that were massacred were marked on the map, they were exactly in the direction that she was looking at. Something is coming? The uneasiness in her heart grew stronger. Catherine, who had always been calm, felt that even her fingers were trembling slightly. She took a few deep breaths and looked around. The servants were pointing at the black smoke. The few noble ladies who stayed behind were talking about the vulgar lifestyle of the untouchables. The soldiers were resting leisurely under the tents, the horses wagging their tails and lowering their heads to graze on the grass. Everything was still as harmonious as before, but Catherine's legs were trembling violently. Dorem, take stock of all the soldiers now, and leave immediately. Go find my father. Miss, you are. Don't ask for the reason, go. Leave now. Fortunately, she was dressed in hunting attire today. Having made up her mind, she ran a few steps to her pampered horse, and almost fell from the other side when she flipped onto it. After stabilizing her body with great effort, she walked towards the forest with the private soldiers who had rushed over. Catherine, what are you going to do? A few of her best friends saw her leaving in such a hurry, and asked one after another. However, Catherine was already surrounded by the sound of horse hooves, and could not hear them at all. Soon, she disappeared from their sight. Really, she doesn't seem to be herself today. Did she fall for a man and go crazy? Who knows? The others were still chatting in boredom. After a few minutes, someone suddenly pointed into the distance and said, "That's right. There seems to be another group of people coming over there. What's going on?" It was the Rose Cross just now, and now another group. The way they ride their horses is so strange. Why are they swaying back and forth? It seems to be true. Wait, that doesn't seem to be horses, right? Chapter 478. At the same time, the battle between Roddy and the Viper Cross had entered a stalemate. The pagan infantrymen waved their weapons in a frenzy, trying to force their way through the barbarian soldiers' defensive line. However, as the battle progressed, they realized that the iron tower-like fellows in front of them did not even take half a step back. Countless soldiers cursed in a low voice. Their initial high fighting spirit gradually turned into helplessness and despair. Why were these people wearing heavy armor made of fine iron? This kind of material was usually only worn by heavy armored knights, who did not care about the cost. If a normal person were to put it on, they would probably be exhausted after running 100 meters. However, these burly barbarians were as relaxed as if they were wearing leather armor. With their almost unlimited stamina, they raised their shields and held the defensive line firmly. The first batch of Viper Cross infantrymen were generally equipped with one-handed knives and one-handed swords. These weapons were not a problem against light armored units, but they could only leave a mark on heavy armor. On the contrary, the barbarian soldiers' enlarged version of Elrond's long sword was shockingly powerful. Every time they stabbed or slashed, it made people feel as if there was no way to dodge. Height and arm length was definitely a fatal advantage on the battlefield. Although every barbarian soldier was using a one-handed weapon, their attack range was definitely not inferior to a normal person using a two-handed weapon. Therefore, no matter how hard the Viper Cross troops fought, they could only compress the defensive line and could not break the situation. Seeing this, Frando's complacent mood was completely gone. How could this be? Advance with the reserves. Attack from the flanks. He had to disrupt their formation. We can't let them carry on like this. The reason why he was so anxious was because Frando also understood what that huge, holy seal meant. However, the war had already started. If they retreated now, they would definitely be chased by the enemy. When that time came, it would definitely be a one-sided collapse. He actually had no other choice. Bring out all your attacks. Don't hold back your magic. Frando shouted at the two mages with bloodshot eyes. At this moment, 70% of the infantry troops had pressed forward. Now, Frando and 80 mercenaries formed the last reserve force at the back. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the deadlocked line of defense in front of them. As long as there was a slight flaw, they would press forward and destroy the enemy. The two mages desperately released one spell after another. The fireball spell, that was suitable for the battlefield, was the best way to break through the defensive line. However, the two elemental mages soon discovered that no matter how their spells attacked, the powerful fireballs would be weakened by an invisible barrier when they flew to the defensive line. And when they exploded on the bodies of the soldiers, the barbarians and dragon lance knights who were hit quickly got up after falling to the ground. As the intermediate healing spells fell on their bodies, they would rejoin the battle expressionlessly. Naife, the left. All right. In the face of the sudden battle, Roddy did not let Naife simply watch the show. Instead, he assigned her a few simple tasks. The energy separation barrier, that weakened the power of the spells, was one of them. Logically speaking, her current spell level was not enough to make the fireball spell harmless. However, with the high resistance of the Mark of the Dragon Slayer on the Dragon Lance Knights, the defense of the expensive armor and Akasha's buff, these soldiers already had the capital to not be afraid of magic attacks. High military expenditure would eventually lead to result. Almost all of the assets that Roddy had accumulated in the past 2 years were used to upgrade the armed forces. Therefore, he was not surprised at all that they were indestructible at this time. The barbarian soldiers' levels were not high. Although they had physical advantages, under the continuous attacks, there was inevitably casualties. However, once these injured big guys fell down, they would immediately be dragged to the back of the defensive line by their companions for treatment. The iron-like armor allowed them to avoid fatal attack. Because of this, after the entire front line fought for a full 10 minutes, more than 30 people had been reduced, but not a single one had died. And most of them, after receiving treatment from potions or magic, were reorganized into reserve troops, ready to fight on the front line again. What was the point of war? At the end of the day, it was a competition of resources. I have more money to burn, good equipment, rich experience, strong soldiers, tough bridge, tough horse, tough bridge, tough horse, tough horse. In contrast, although the death rate of the Viper Cross's mages was greatly reduced, the gap in the ratio of casualties was constantly widening. The sound of hooves could be heard from the north side of the battlefield. The charging cavalry of the Viper Cross was intercepted by the guards of the Ducal Palace led by Titus and Wellington. Although these pagan knights were far stronger than the private soldiers of the nobles, they could not threaten Sally's core position at all when faced with two Grand Knights who had advanced more than 20 levels. "Lord Bishop, we can't break through. Press forward. Press forward." Cold sweat was dripping down Frando's forehead, but he had no other choice. If he could not complete the mission, he would also die if he went back. But just when his mind was in a mess, suddenly the sound of hooves could be heard from the south side of the battlefield. Turning his head, Bishop Frando felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. 40 fully armed light armored knights rushed out of the dense forest. The Rose Cross emblem on their shields was extremely conspicuous, allowing everyone to identify them at a glance. "It's the pagans. Damn it. This is a trap." When Frando saw the Holy Seal, he still thought that Sally might be bluffing. But when he saw the real troops of the Rose Cross, how could he not know that he had fallen into a trap? Did that guy Myrno sell me out? Or did the royal family think that the Viper Cross needed to be balanced? This was the sorrow of being a chess piece. For a moment, Frando could not figure out who wanted him dead, but this emotion only lasted for a moment. He knew that there was no time to think about it. If he wanted to live, he had to fight to the death. Without saying a word, Frando gripped his staff and personally went into battle. As a high-grade priest, he immediately cast a large-scale, holy word, courage, to stabilize the morale of the soldiers. Then, he cast 2 group healing spells to help the wounded soldiers at the back quickly get up and join the battle. Mages, stop attacking and help defend. He shouted to the side, but the elementalist not far away screamed in fear. The middle-order mage armor shattered as an arrow pierced through his chest. Seeing this, Frando immediately cast 3 types of protective shields to protect himself. He glanced at the lifeless mage and gritted his teeth as he moved forward. The defense of the middle-order mage armor was similar to that of fine iron heavy armor. Ordinary arrows were completely ineffective against it. But the scene in front of him told him that there was a powerful archer in the enemy's formation who could shoot the spellcasters at any time. In modern warfare, snipers were the masters of small-scale battles, and Roddy was the same. This hornbow named Stinger had a lethality that was 1.5 times higher than the ice thorn. When combined with the heavy armor-piercing arrows, the theoretical damage value of each arrow was almost the same as Irwin's axe. In other words, Roddy's attack power had far surpassed the mage's and became the cannon with the highest damage output on the battlefield. When he really went all out, no one could imagine how much power he would have. After Roddy's attack, the pressure on the soldiers of the Viper Cross multiplied. Other than the elementalists who were directly shot to death, the divine mages who were protected by shields were also shot one by one. After 12 arrows swept across the battlefield, 3 divine mages were directly shot to death, and the remaining 4 were seriously injured and fell to the ground. All the other spellcasters bent their backs and did not dare to show their heads. The morale of the entire attacking force was suppressed by Roddy's power. Naife stared blankly at Roddy beside her, her eyes wide open. When Roddy first came to save her, she knew that Roddy was strong, but she did not expect that after half a year, he had improved to such a level. At this time, Roddy did not notice Naife's gaze at all. He only shouted at Sodaler, who was in front of him, "Prepare to counterattack." Sodaler waved his sword in response. Roddy turned his gaze to the front and shot several arrows to suppress the divine mages. Then he looked to the other side and shouted, "Sally, Akasha, front row, blessing of power." The 2 priests, who usually did not see eye to eye, did not waste any time and immediately raised their hands to cast a spell. 3 seconds later, a milky white light completely covered the entire front line of soldiers. Guys, shield strike. At the forefront of the front line, Irwin used the barbarian's unique battle roar to shout this command. The next moment, all the soldiers holding tower shields suddenly took a step back, and under the great force of the blessing of power, they suddenly raised their shields and rushed forward. Boom! More than 30 tower shields exploded in the process of contact with the enemy. The front row of the Viper Cross soldiers all stumbled backwards as if they had been hit by a car. In the next moment, the barbarian infantry followed 3 steps forward, the longswords in their hands stabbed forward and pulled out. An entire row of enemies were directly knocked down. Second, shield strike. Boom! Another wave of uniform collective attack. The front line of the Viper Cross was actually pushed back more than 10 meters in a few seconds. This terrifying situation finally caused them to be unable to withstand the attacks, and the situation of collapse appeared. Kill. The barbarian soldiers were completely bloodshot, and the heretics who had been suppressing them all this time seemed to be beaten silly and involuntarily began to retreat. The situation on the battlefield would often develop in a snowball manner. Once the morale of the barbarians began to fall, if they did not quickly use various methods to raise it, then the soldiers would very quickly fall into endless fear and indecision. Bishop Frando understood this logic. He gritted his teeth and wanted to cast a divine spell, but when he looked up, he saw that the shield had shattered under the impact of 3 arrows. If he had not dodged in time, the last arrow would have pierced through his ear. Too terrifying. Frando had no lack of battle experience, but he had never thought that someone could rely on bow and arrows to suppress almost all the spellcasters on his side. What should he do now? If he did not stop the decline, he was afraid that this battle would be a complete failure. Hold on. Everyone hold on. Our reinforcements will be here soon. Helplessly, he shouted towards the soldiers in front of him, but even he did not believe that these words would be able to restore the morale of the barbarians. At this moment, the 40 cavalry of the Rose Cross had already entered the battlefield, and the infantry in front of him were retreating little by little. No matter how he looked at it, it was a situation of certain death, but just when Frando was in despair, a bright trajectory suddenly appeared in his vision. A fireball flew straight from the back of Sally's troops, and actually landed accurately on Roddy's position. Boom! The fireball exploded on the ground, and the broken horse corpses and blood scattered in all directions. In an instant Akashao, Naifei, and 5 soldiers were shaken off their horses. Even Sally, who was not far away, almost fell off her horse. The most taboo thing for an army was to be attacked from the front and rear, and it was even more taboo for the commander to be beheaded. And the scene in front of them suddenly made the barbarian soldiers who had just charged forward with vigor slow down. Frando could not believe that there would be a moment of reversal in the battle. He got up and rushed into the troops in ecstasy, and began to cast all kinds of divine spells without a care for his life. After personally picking up a long sword, he forcibly led the soldiers who had regained their morale and began to counterattack. There is still hope, there is still hope. Thanks for the monthly tickets. Lazy Sheep Beating Mido, Enhanced Barrett, Huyen Haha, Horadrim, Schwerer Kai Luan's Descendant, Shuyu 38781105, P. A. Myers, Cyborg, Siegfried, Crazy Chihuahua, North Chownan, HSIOCR, Dream Chime. Chapter 479. Sienna, who was riding on his horse, could not help but laugh out loud as he watched the reversal of the battle. Beautiful! Well fought! Mage Kaysen, when we get back, I'll get my father to give you whatever you want. It was his first time participating in a battle, and he had forgotten to conceal his playboy aura. His tone was extremely arrogant, causing the mage beside him to frown slightly. In fact, Sienna could not be blamed for losing his composure. It was easy to say that he was in control, but the choices he faced were far beyond what an ordinary person could imagine. The moment Sienna saw the Rose-Cross Holy Seal, he had quickly made a series of deductions and judgments. This was enough to show that his brain was far more efficient than others. However, judgments were just judgment. What he should do was what he should do. The attack of the Viper Cross had fallen into the opponent's trap, and the outcome was very likely to end in failure. He was still a distance away from the battlefield. If he turned around and left, he would naturally be safe and not be involved in the battle, but was that really the case? Sienna knew very well that since Sally was able to set up this trap, it meant that she had long known about the plot of the Viper Cross. If she did not die this time, it would not be a problem for her to turn around and expose the Milner family's scandal. Putting aside how Sally was going to take revenge, if this matter were to spread, the commoners could ignore it, but the reputation of the nobles would definitely plummet. If it was an ordinary noble, they could still bear the consequences, but the Milner family could not bear the consequences. This would cause the royal family to directly abandon the Milner family. Charles II did not lack helpers. He could easily support another family to achieve the results he wanted, but the Milner family would definitely be doomed for eternity. Sienna was not stupid. After hesitating for a few seconds, he immediately ordered everyone to assist the Viper Cross. He believed that the addition of 60 cavalrymen, 4 advanced knights, and an intermediate mage would definitely have a significant impact on the battle. And everything that happened before his eyes made him believe that he had made the right bet. Mage Kason's long-range fireball had achieved its goal. It had accurately blown up Roddy. Sienna was excited, and at the same time, he waved his hand and said, "Charge! Kill all of them!" "Young master, we need to leave a reserve team," Wizard Kason reminded him from the side. Sienna had never led an army into battle before and had only just remembered some basic battlefield rules. He hurriedly stopped the 20 guards and allowed the 3 advanced knights and 40 light armored cavalry to charge towards Sally's position. "There shouldn't be a problem now. Wizard Kason, continue to pressure them, we can't let them recover." Roddy noticed the situation around him. He first comforted them, and then immediately turned around and shouted, "This fireball is just a tickle. It can't even break my leather armor. They are at the end of their flight. Everyone, charge. Crush them." These words immediately calmed down the morale of the army. Ignoring the blood stains on his body, Roddy turned around and said to Sodeler, who had been leading the cavalry regiment, "Teach them a lesson." Sodeler, who was also worried, saw this and immediately nodded. Then he pulled the reins and roared, "Dragonlance Regiment, let them see what a real charge is." "Yes. Sally, get on the horse. Let everyone see you." Although she did not have time to say more words to Roddy, she quickly turned around and got on the horse again. But her eyes were full of worry and nervousness as she looked at Roddy. With a few orders from Roddy, the chaotic battlefield quickly stabilized. He quickly checked the injuries of Naifei and Akasha, and the desire for revenge spread uncontrollably. But there was no anger on his face. He just whispered to the 3 people in front of him, "Protect yourselves. Try your best to cast the shield. I'll be back soon." Roddy's body was covered with the blood of the broken warhorse. At this time, he looked extremely terrible. But when he picked up the needle bow, Naifei held his hand tightly and said, "Brother Roddy, don't go, it's dangerous, because it's dangerous. That's why I can't let it threaten you." Roddy smiled, picked up the 2 quiver, and rushed into the nearby forest, quickly disappearing from everyone's sight. "Damn it! Is he immune to magic?" 300 meters away, Sienna, who had been proud of himself, shouted loudly. Sodeler led the cavalry and charged toward the private soldiers. Wizard Kason immediately began casting spells to take aim. In order to ensure that he hit the moving target, he used the faster and more numerous icicle spell. However, after casting the spell 3 times, the 9 icicles all shattered into pieces on Sodeler's chest armor. The spell that could pierce through people like paper in the past did not even have the ability to pierce through armor now. Wizard Kason furrowed his brows. He was not as childish as Sienna. With a change of his casting gesture, Fireball shot out, heading straight for Sodeler's chest. Boom! The fireball crossed nearly 100 meters and hit the target. But after the flames and smoke exploded, the figure on the warhorse did not even pause and continued to sprint forward. The battle aura of a Shadow Knight could be condensed into various forms. Apart from clones, it could also be used to block spell attack. Although it was very costly, Sodeler could at least block it 3 times. Because Sodeler knew his chance for revenge had come. The enemy's unique mithril armor proved that they were Sienna's private army. So, what he had to do was to break through the defense line, kill the enemy in front of him, and kill the heir of the Milner family. Scenes of the past flashed before his eyes. Although this Viscount Senna was young when his family was being persecuted, he had participated in many things such as robbing and bullying women. An indescribable hostility appeared on Sodeler's face, and the full release of his shadow battle aura caused the air around him to distort. There were no longer any disturbances in his eyes, and it was as if there was only one goal left in this world: the warhorse sped up again, and 4 shadow clones suddenly appeared around him. Sodalar roared and slashed at the enemy in front of him. Rip! The private army in front of him was cut in half like a rag. Blood splattered everywhere. Sodalar's 5 slashes were all fatal. He used so much force that the blade of the guardian tooth was twisted and deformed. Sodalar, who loved swords as much as his life, casually threw the longsword away and pulled out his backup weapon. He stared straight ahead and continued to charge. Sienna had been waiting for the enemy to be annihilated, but he didn't expect that the cavalry he had spent a lot of money to train would be slashed to the ground. After a series of crashing sounds, more than 40 knights were directly split apart. Some were dead and some were injured. They couldn't even stop the advance of these knights. What's going on? He watched helplessly as the 2 advanced knights in front of him were beheaded by Sodalar's swift sword. The flickering cold light scared him to the point of shivering. He knew swordsmanship, so with just 1 move and a half, he knew what level the opponent was at. With his half-baked skills, Sienna felt that he wouldn't even be able to survive half a move from Sodalar. So, Sienna's mind raced and he immediately shouted, "Guards, go! Quick! Wizard Kaysen, use your spells to stop them." Just as Wizard Kaysen raised his hand to cast a spell, Sienna pulled on the reins and turned around, ready to escape. There was a slope in front of him, and after crossing it, there was a long slope that allowed him to accelerate. Sienna had already calculated his escape route. He firmly believed that, where there's life, there's hope. As long as he could make it back alive, but before he could think further, an arrow suddenly flew in from the side of his field of vision. Pfft! The warhorse under him was hit in the head by the arrow and fell on the spot, sending him flying. After landing, Sienna hurriedly rolled away in pain, narrowly avoiding the fate of being crushed to death by the horse. However, when he regained his senses and was about to stand up, Wizard Kaysen beside him shouted, "Don't move!" Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Thanks for the monthly votes. The Best Morning Light, Bird, Wise Robber Fortitude Eye, Sword Emperor Lionhaken, Dream Chime, Cold Blade, Book Friend 418555733, Luzhou Old Wong, Chalk, Let the Rumors Come True. Thanks for the support. Brandy and Black Tea, Book Friend 13997448889. Yesterday, he had braved the rain to drive more than 300 kilometers back. This visit to the old man in the hospital was very emotional. When he was young, he smoked and drank too much. Now that he was old, he was tormented by all kinds of illnesses, including late-stage stomach cancer and other illnesses. Because his body was too weak, he couldn't even undergo surgery. Now, he could only live day by day. Chapter 480. The path of frost Ka Song had just cast had already spread out on the ground 50 meters away. He had just turned his head when he saw Sienna being blasted away. Seeing that arrow, he immediately understood that someone was attacking from the side. Without thinking, he yelled, "Don't move!" and then took a few steps forward, raising his hands to cast Ice Shield, Frost Barrier, and mid-level Mage Armor to block in front of Sienna. At that moment, Rhodey had switched to using the exploding arrows to attack. 4 arrows attacked one after another. The explosion outside the shield caused the area in front of Kaysen to be covered in flames. However, Kaysen's combat experience was much stronger than the private soldiers. After continuously replenishing his shield without changing his expression, he crazily chanted a spell and forcefully counterattacked the arrows. 3 flame strikes flew in the direction of the arrows, and after smashing through several large trees, they ignited a large patch of fire, causing Roddy's attack to stop in an instant. Child's play. After the situation was under control, Ka Song sneered inwardly. To a mage, no matter how powerful an arrow was, it was just an arrow. If he wanted to increase its power, He could only rely on items like explosive arrows. However, these things were a joke in the face of a magic shield. So he turned his gaze to the forest in the distance, preparing to end the battle quickly. Roddy's figure could no longer be seen in the large patch of fire that exploded from the flame arrows. However, at a certain moment, Ka Song suddenly saw a row of trees swaying, as well as a black shadow flashing past. He raised his staff, and the sphere of frost blade, that he had long prepared, immediately flew forward, wrapped in cold air. Under his precise control of the spell's trajectory, it circled around the trees in a straight line and bombarded the back of the tree where the black shadow was. Crash! The power of a 4th-level spell was extremely terrifying. In theory, it would not be a problem to wipe out a small team. At this moment, a giant tree that required 3 people to wrap their arms around had its roots crushed by the sharp frost blade, and it immediately fell. Unsurprisingly, Roddy did not follow up with any attack. Phew! Ka Song heaved a sigh of relief, trying his best to calm the burning sensation that came from using too much magic. On the other side of the battlefield, the Dragon Spear Knights led by Sodeler were unstoppable. They had the upper hand in both charges. However, the 20 guards that Sienna had sent had their uses. After the first wave of attacks, only Sodeler and 4 others managed to shake off the entanglement and continued to gallop towards Sienna. However, their horses all fell as soon as they stepped onto the path of ice. This was the ability of an intermediate magician to turn the tide of a battle. The strength that Kaysen had displayed was worthy of the money that the Milner clan had spent to nurture him. Kill them! Kill them all! Don't leave a single one alive! Sienna had already regained his senses. Seeing that the situation was not out of control, he yelled furiously. What had just happened was probably the greatest humiliation of his life. He had almost been killed for his desertion. He could never let the enemy know about this. They had to die. However, just as Ka Song was about to continue casting the spell, his body suddenly trembled. Pooh! A long arrow came from the side of Ka Song's back. It avoided the ice barrier in front of him and pierced through the ice shield and magician armor, stabbing deep into his abdomen. How Ka Song endured the pain and turned his head to cast the spell, but what he saw was a second and third arrow coming at him. When the shield was completely shattered and the power of the arrows hit his body, only then did Ka Song realize that he had been completely fooled by his opponent. 2 arrows had directly pierced through his chest, causing this intermediate magician to silently fall to the ground. He would never have imagined that the black shadow that he had attacked with the frost blade ball was just a distraction that Roddy had used Magician's Hand to carry his cloak and float past. It was an old trick of making a feint in the east while attacking in the west. Just a level 0 spell had fooled the intermediate magician. Of course, part of the reason was that the opponent did not know Roddy's class, but such a result had already highlighted the advantage of being an advanced magician class. However, Roddy did not feel proud of himself. He raised his stinger bow and aimed at Sienna, but paused just as he was about to release the bowstring. After some thought, he changed his target to the private soldiers of the Milner family on the other side of the battlefield. Things like revenge were better left to Sodeler. At this time, the crisis of Sally's team had been completely alleviated with the arrival of the Rose Cross infantry. When Frando saw that Sienna's team had been completely defeated, he finally understood that there was nothing he could do and gave the order to retreat with hatred. Roddy continued to shoot down a few more private soldiers of the Milner family. He then carried the remaining half of the exploding arrows on his back and turned to look at the other side of the forest. Through the soul contract, the Train King, who was far away at the Mel River, had finally arrived. It's finally done. Looking at the Viper Cross retreating like the tide, Roddy shook his trembling fingers and slowly let out a breath. In his field of vision, Sodeler, who had fallen off his warhorse and could only walk, was walking towards Sienna with a longsword in his hand. The latter panicked and pulled out his gorgeous longsword. He wanted to get up and fight, but after looking at Sodeler for a second, he was completely defeated and turned to run away. Sienna ran to the top of the slope with all his might, but before he could climb over, he was tripped by an arrow that suddenly nailed him to the ground and rolled back. Sodeler approached with a long sword in his hand. Sienna looked at the blood-stained dragonbone heavy armor, and his usual confidence completely disappeared. Of course, he wasn't a fool. He knew all about Sodeler's information. Back when he had wiped out the other party's family, he had committed many sins. Now that he saw this acquaintance of his, how could he not know what he was up to? However, the words to beg for mercy could not come out. He could only hear the sound of his teeth chattering, and his legs were not listening to him. He did not bother to get up and simply climbed to the top of the slope with all his might, hoping that he could escape this calamity, but at this moment, the sharp sound of an arrow rang out from the forest. Whoosh, whoosh, this was an extremely unique whistle. After hearing it, Roddy immediately looked up at the sky. Natha, who was riding on a needle-tailed sandal, was flying over his head. The arrow had come from her hand. According to Roddy's previous arrangement, her mission was to patrol the surroundings of the battlefield and make sure that there weren't any more enemy reinforcements coming. Once an unfamiliar troop appeared, she would immediately warn them with an arrow. The more urgent the situation, the more arrows would be fired. 5 whistles signified the highest level of warning. So, Roddy and Sodeler's expressions changed at the same time. They immediately turned to look at the main battlefield. But the Viper Cross was still fleeing, and there didn't seem to be any reinforcements coming. What did Natha see? When they turned back, Sienna, who had already climbed over the slope, was panting heavily. At the same time, he was running for his life. But before Roddy could raise his bow and arrow to stop him, a large net suddenly appeared above Sienna's head. Ah! Sienna screamed in pain as he was tripped by the tightening net. This scene made Roddy and Sodeler tense up. Although they couldn't see what was happening because they were below the slope, a net really had a distinctive feature. Wasn't this something that only orc-wolf riders could use? The next moment, it was as if a nightmare had suddenly broken into reality. A group of orcs wearing simple leather armor and riding on wolves stepped onto the slope and appeared in front of everyone. Over there. There's someone over there. On the other side of the forest, Catherine, who was running with her private army, was trying hard to control the horses. Because the nobles were scattered, she could only rely on asking other nobles to find her father. When she saw the shadows of other horses appearing in front of her, she immediately forced herself to rush forward. Initially, there were a total of 23 private soldiers who followed her into the forest. Now they had been divided into 4 teams. Catherine didn't know how to ride a horse, so after riding for a short while, her legs felt sore and uncomfortable. To be honest, the one with the best horsemanship among the female nobles in Iferto was probably Sally, who had been on the battlefield. Most of the remaining nobles had long forgotten to practice this skill due to the long period of peace, and only treated horsemanship as a dispensable skill. Catherine felt a little regretful, but she could only bear with it. After she and the private soldiers passed through a relatively dense forest, they finally arrived in front of the horses. But Catherine realized that there was actually no one on the horses. Where are they? Search around. Maybe they're hunting prey nearby. They won't go far. The private soldiers dispersed, and in less than half a minute, Catherine heard someone shouting. She didn't think much and urged her horse to rush over. But when she saw the scene in front of her, she felt as if her whole body was gripped by something. There were 3 or 4 corpses on the ground. Their clothes clearly showed that they were the private soldiers of a certain baron. Not far away there was a person in gorgeous armor, obviously the baron himself. But the key point was, their heads were gone. These fellows' necks were sliced open by something, and their blood was splattered all over the grass. There were buzzing mosquitoes and flies all around. Ugh, Catherine was a noble who lived like a princess. When had she ever seen such a bloody and terrifying scene? With just a glance, she turned her head and vomited. But the fear in her heart inexplicably gave her a little more strength. She took a deep breath and turned around to leave. Who knew that 100 meters away, there were several figures of nobles riding on horses? She was just about to open her mouth and shout, but she saw that behind them were more than 10 huge wolves, and the strong figures riding on the wolves made Catherine's eyes widen. The tattered clothes, light green skin, and protruding fangs, all these characteristics indicated that the riders were the legendary orcs. This is not true, this is not true. All of this made Catherine think that she was having a terrible nightmare. She stretched out her hand and pinched her thigh. The sharp pain made her take a deep breath. When she opened her eyes, there were already people in the distance being caught by the wolf cavalry. In the midst of the screams, the 2 private soldiers were directly chopped to the ground. Catherine, who had witnessed all of this, tightly covered her mouth. The wolf cavalry soldiers were still chasing after those people, but they did not notice the few figures holding their breaths 60 meters away, not daring to make a sound. They waved their crude weapons, cried out a few times, and continued to move into the distance. Go, quickly go! Catherine's lips were a little pale. Miss, where are you going? At this time, the private soldiers were also stuttering. In the face of this kind of wolf cavalry that only existed in legends, each of them was completely frightened by the other party's ferocity just now. In the opposite direction, yes, in the opposite direction. The farther away from them, the better. Catherine didn't know what was going on in her mind. She just wanted to escape from everything, escape as far as possible. ******************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** Lazy sheep beating Mido, enhanced Barrett, Huyen Haha, Horadrim, Schwerer Sin Yang, Shuyu 86552484. Thank you for the support. Shuyu 86552484, Minji Yang, and Guts Branch Leader. Chapter 481. Due to the panic, Catherine quickly lost her way in the forest with her 5 private soldiers. However, in the process of running left and right, she was lucky to meet a team. Viscount Charlie. Viscount Charlie. There were about 40 to 50 people in front of them. The noble leading them was a feudal lord in the eastern part of Ephrata. His influence was considered to be in the upper echelons of Ephrata, and he had a good relationship with the Bolton territory. His team was well equipped, and they gave off a sense of security at first glance. Viscount Charlie was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He was slightly plump, and even his hunting leather armor couldn't hide his protruding belly. Hearing Catherine's voice, he, who was complaining about not having any prey, immediately turned his head and replied curiously, "Isn't this Miss Catherine? Didn't you and your father act together?" Although that was what he said, it took the Viscount a lot of effort to move his gaze away from her chest. "Lord Viscount, have you seen my father? I came in to look for him, but I couldn't find him." "Oh, I chatted with him when I first entered the forest, but he went to the west after that. No one knows where he is now. Why, Miss Catherine, do you want to take a walk with me? The forest is very dangerous. It might not be enough for you to bring a few people with you." As he spoke, he pointed at his well-equipped private soldiers, seemingly showing off. If it was in the past, Catherine would definitely choose to flatter him before making a timely request. She might even purposely puff out her chest a few times to achieve her goal. But now, she wasn't in the mood at all. After hurriedly glancing at the soldiers, Catherine said loudly, "Viscount Charlie, I hope to seek your protection. We must leave this forest immediately." "Leave now?" Viscount Charlie raised his eyebrows high. Then, he turned his eyes and said with a tacit understanding, "Miss Catherine, are you in the mood to come over to my place today? But you can wait a little longer. Bring me to hunt a few deer. Dinner will be more sumptuous. I heard that deer blood is very useful. Catherine's face twisted in anger when she heard that. Deer blood was a tonic used by nobles to strengthen their sex drive. Obviously, he thought that she was asking for a one-night stand. At a time like this, he was still thinking about this. No, no, no. Viscount Charlie, you might have misunderstood me. I'm really not joking. I just saw a noble being chased by an orc wolf rider. What? Did I hear that right? Wolf riders. Is she talking about beastmen? The surrounding private soldiers immediately started discussing, and Viscount Charlie's smile became even brighter. Wolf riders? Orc wolf riders? I think Miss Catherine must have heard too many unreliable stories from the bards. The orcs' territory is thousands of miles away from here. Even if there are wolf riders, they will attack the border first. Even if they attack Hollier City, it has nothing to do with us here. No, no, no. I'm not mistaken. I saw 3 people being killed by them. Miss Catherine, perhaps this is your first time in the Da Vinci Forest? There are some ferocious beasts in this forest, so it's quite dangerous. Don't worry, my team will definitely protect you. Viscount Charlie interrupted her, but when he said this, he still looked at Catherine's breasts and swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Catherine still wanted to explain the danger of the situation, but no matter how much she said, even if she got her private soldiers to testify, it was useless. Viscount Charlie even said impatiently, "Even if it's really the orcs, my team is enough to make sure that they won't be able to return. Miss Catherine, are you relieved now?" Catherine didn't speak, only feeling cold all over. She had never hated these sanctimonious nobles as much as she did today. Why do these people only know how to enjoy themselves all day long? Even when the danger is right in front of them, they didn't notice it at all, and even mocked others as lunatics. But when she thought about it, Catherine vainly realized. Wasn't this her previous self? When that country bumpkin spoke frankly about the kingdom's danger, she disdainfully mocked him for being alarmist. She didn't even have the patience to continue listening to him. Now it seemed that all the nobles who were paralyzed by peace would pay the price for their laxity. Is the team ready to move forward, Miss Catherine? Viscount Charlie called out to her. Catherine nodded blankly and then followed the team. No matter what, if she acted alone, it would be a dead end for her. She could only choose to follow. With more than 40 well-equipped guards by her side, the orcs probably wouldn't have the ability to attack. She thought to herself. But a few minutes later, when Viscount Charlie finally found a wild boar and was about to kill it, a team of orc wolf riders suddenly rushed out from the forest and pulled Catherine into a nightmare once again. What the hell is this? Damn it. Defend. Protect me. Come over. Viscount Charlie was completely frightened by the wolf riders that were charging at him. He didn't expect to see orcs alive in his lifetime, but he didn't lose his fighting spirit. He immediately raised his bow and arrows and started shooting. He believed that these guys were as vulnerable as the wild boar. But he quickly realized the cruelty of reality. The orcs' strong bodies could even ignore the soft arrows of the hunting bow. Their charging footsteps never stopped. More than 20 private soldiers in front pulled out their long swords and tried their best to gather together to protect Viscount Charlie. But in the end they were smashed by the 15 wolf riders. Like a sand sculpture being smashed by a rising tide, Viscount Charlie's team collapsed in an instant, and when he was fleeing in panic, his skull was smashed by the enemy with a mace with iron nails tied to it. When the private soldiers saw that their master was dead, they completely lost the idea of fighting back. They scattered in all directions, but because of their poor horsemanship and the lack of explosive power of the horses, almost all of them were caught by the orc wolf riders and fell into a pool of blood one by one. The grayish-black mount wolves were panting heavily due to exhaustion. Their mouths were filled with foamy white saliva. Almost every mount wolf was covered in blood. On the simple and crude saddles hung human heads with terrified expressions. These fragile humans, killing them is like killing sheep. They're wearing such fine armor. Even my sword can't cut through them. If it weren't for these humans running away, I'm afraid things wouldn't have gone so smoothly. They're just a bunch of cowardly dogs. The orcs grinned and discussed the situation in front of them savagely. A few hundred meters away, Catherine, who had chosen to run away at the first moment, had already jumped off her horse and hid behind a tree. She tried hard to hold back the fear that made her want to cry. What should I do? What should I do? Asterisk, 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 orc attack. Line up. Defend. When the order was shouted through the skill battle roar, almost everyone on the battlefield could hear Soddler's voice. The Dragon Spear Knights, who were entangled with Sienna's private soldiers, were collectively stunned. Titus and Wellington, who were chasing from afar, also tightened their reins. Not only that, whether it was the Rose Cross or Viper Cross, all of them stopped because of the word orcs. Panting heavily, the people raised their heads and couldn't help but look into the distance. When they saw the figures riding the black wolves into the battlefield, most of them revealed confused expressions. Many of the soldiers in the middle of the kingdom didn't know about the wolf riders at all. They didn't even realize what orcs represented. But no matter how they thought, Roddy and Soddler, who bore the brunt of the attack, had to face the attack of the 30 wolf riders. Soddler gripped his longsword tightly. After scanning the surroundings, he looked at Roddy. The latter pointed to the forest beside him and shouted, "Run to the left! Find a warhorse and get on! I'll cover you!" Roddy stretched out his hand and pulled out the remaining explosive arrows. He aimed at the incoming enemies and began to shoot. Boom! The first wolf rider's chest was blasted open by an arrow. The splatter of blood and flesh enraged the rest of the wolf riders. Along the way, they had flattened several human villages unscathed. So far, there were almost no casualties. The endless victories had given them the illusion that they were invincible, and Roddy's shooting immediately made everyone turn their attention to him. Kill that damned human! After countless internal battles and selections, the orcs under Warlord Goddard's banner were now stronger than the wolf riders Roddy had met at the border 2 years ago. Each of them was strong and skilled. So even though there were only 30 of them, the momentum of the wolf riders when they charged down the slope still had a barbaric momentum that human cavalry couldn't compare to. In such a desperate situation, Roddy naturally wouldn't stand still. He turned and ran. At the same time, he used all his skills to accelerate. Sprint and leap were activated at the same time with full concentration and sprint. In an instant, Roddy shook off the wolf riders and ran towards the forest on the side like a bolt of lightning. This gave the orcs a fright. The guy in front who was ready to throw the net almost dropped it under his feet. They never thought that someone could run faster than a warg on flat ground. Fortunately, Roddy's skill only lasted for 5 seconds. After putting a distance of about 50 meters between himself and the orcs, his speed immediately slowed down. At this time, the entire Wolf Rider team had already left the battlefield. The red-eyed orcs didn't seem to be under anyone's command at all. They were all howling, obviously wanting to kill Roddy to avenge their companions. In terms of understanding of orcs, no one in this forest could compare to Roddy. So, he quickly made an assessment of the enemy's strength and immediately came up with a countermeasure. He continued running. Just as the orcs closed in and raised their nets again, the huge figure of the Train King had already appeared in front of Roddy. Roddy directly used leap to jump on the back of the elk. He reached out and grabbed the ridged guard on the saddle and fastened his feet to a special stabilizer belt. Ever since they entered the forest, the custom-made half-body scale armor had long been equipped on the body of the Train King. Not only that, the two sides of the saddle on its back were also equipped with at least 500 arrows and all kinds of backup weapons, So when Roddy put on the Mongolian style of shooting and used Magician's Hand to hover more than 10 arrows on the right side of his body, the situation immediately changed. 1 against 30, Roddy charged head-on. Monthly tickets gratitude, wooden clogs, heartless sect, rainfall peak. Chapter 482. In the era of cold weapons, a mount with thick skin and flesh paired with a sharpshooter with powerful attacks resulted in the creation of a tank with terrifying firepower. The wolf riders were shocked by the huge monster in front of them, but when they saw that the armored monster was just an elk, the fear in their hearts immediately dissipated. They had hunted many elks in the forest along the way. Although the one in front of them was much bigger than the ones before, in the eyes of the orcs, herbivores were always no different from lambs waiting to be slaughtered. So they simply sped up. Some raised their nets, some swung their machetes, and they rushed straight at Roddy. At the same time, Roddy used the Mongolian style to catch the first arrow. Because the distance of the Mongolian style was about 15 centimeters longer than the Mediterranean style, it meant that at least 15% or even 20% more strength was needed to pull the bow to the predetermined position. As a result, the arrows Roddy used now were completely different from the ones before. The body of the arrow was longer, the arrowhead was heavier, and the shaft was thicker. The arrow that had been adjusted, note 2, was almost the same as a thinner short spear. These arrows would not explode, and they only had the purest physical lethality. So when the first arrow was released, the orcs immediately realized that there was a problem. Bang! The orc who was shot in the chest did not groan in pain. Instead, he fell straight down from his mount. The weight of more than 100 pounds still could not stop the huge force when the arrow stopped. The widened T-shaped arrowhead lost its stability, but greatly increased its lethality. It did not penetrate the armor, but directly smashed the opponent's chest. And just as the arrow was released and the bowstring was still vibrating slightly, the second arrow was already on the bowstring with a wave of Roddy's fingers. The large tail groove that was designed to counter the Mongolian style and the Magician's Hand pushed Roddy's shooting speed to the extreme. After activating the rapid shooting skill, his arm movements were so fast that they almost turned into a blur. At a distance of 30 meters, Roddy aimed completely based on his feelings. Because when the shooting speed reached this level, it was meaningless to rely on his eyes to determine the direction of the arrow. He was now like a machine gun that had pulled the trigger. He directly suppressed the enemy with the number of arrows. The sound of the bowstring cutting through the air was continuous. Although he had gone through a lot of training, the accuracy of the Mongolian style was still not as good as Roddy's usual Mediterranean style. The first 3 arrows either missed or hit the ward. However, after some adjustments, when the speed increase of the rapid shooting skill stacked up to 25%, his attack had a qualitative change. 4 arrows per second. The 4 or 5 orcs charging at him did not even see what was going on before they fell headfirst to the ground, as if they had been hit by an arrow at the same time. Roddy was almost like a cannon at that moment. With his strength alone, he had achieved the suppressive effect of a squadron's shooting. Although the Train King could only move forward unhurriedly, a distance of 30 meters was a matter of 2 or 3 seconds for both sides. And in these 2 or 3 seconds, 7 wolf riders had already been shot down by Roddy. The instant the 2 sides crossed paths, the Train King used its huge antlers to send a warg flying, while the wolf riders on both sides brandished their blades in an attempt to slash at the Train King's legs, only to find their weapons being forcefully broken apart amidst the intense friction. The 3 layers of steel scale armor were not something their weapons could penetrate. 2 nets were thrown onto the protruding plates on both sides of the saddle, but before they could be dragged away, Roddy's arrows had already killed the 2 wolf riders. At such a distance, The advantage of the Mongolian style of shooting was undoubtedly displayed. Roddy gritted his teeth and madly rained arrows on both sides. Like a machine gun firing at close range, he nailed all the wolf riders within a 10-meter radius to the ground. The wolf riders also howled as they tried to drag Roddy off the elk, but they discovered that the Train King was too tall, so most of them could not attack Roddy at all. Even when they got close, the horizontal slashes of their scimitars would be blocked by the protruding plate. Even touching Roddy became a problem for them. In just one exchange of blows, Roddy had already shot 36 arrows, killing and injuring 13 people. As for the wolf riders, other than leaving a few slashes on the Train King's armor and hanging 2 nets, they did nothing else. Roddy gasped for breath. Although he had withstood the charge by himself, the intense and rapid firing of arrows had strained his arm. His fingers were also trembling violently. But there was no excuse for war. He made the Train King turn around and run in another direction, while he turned around and continued shooting. The advantage of mounted archery was once again on display. The wolf riders needed to circle around before they could get close to Roddy again, but his firepower never stopped because he had enough arrows and stamina. He had been suppressing them from the beginning to the end. Standing on the special saddle of the Train King, Roddy's arrows were almost limitless. At the same time, he had the advantage of having a high vantage point in his field of vision. In the end, he decided not to let the Train King escape. Instead, he turned around and charged straight at the wolf riders. This was because after 60 arrows were fired, only 12 of the original 30 wolf riders were left. At this moment, these orcs hadn't even touched the Train King's butt. In the face of such a great disparity in casualties, even the bravest orcs hesitated. Apart from having an advantage in a face-to-face collision, the beastmen were basically getting beaten up the rest of the time. The closer they were to the beastmen, the higher their chances of being killed. This cruel outcome caused the beastmen to stop in their tracks. Then, they turned around and ran at the same time. This was the first wolf rider troop in the entire Da Vinci Forest that chose to run away because they were outmatched. The orcs felt humiliated. They didn't want to believe that their entire troop had been defeated by a single person. But the arrows flying past them forced them to face reality. Retreat! Retreat! They gritted their teeth and urged their wargs to speed up. But before they could run far, they saw a group of 30 to 40 human riders surrounding them. In the past few minutes, Sodeler had already mounted his warhorse again and gathered most of the soldiers of the Dragon Spear Knights to rush over. At this moment, seeing that there were only 12 orcs left, they clamped their horses' abdomens without another word and began to charge head-on with tacit understanding. They had done too many things like beating up orcs on the Nehemia steppe. Hearing the familiar howls of the other party, the Dragon Spear Knights seemed to have returned to the time when they braved the heavy rain to charge at the enemy. But compared to that time, they could be said to have been reborn. 26 of the soldiers who used to only be level 5 or 6 had now become advanced knight. At the same time, all of them held more powerful weapons in their hands and wore expensive armor. More importantly, they had an iron will in their hearts that was stronger than the equipment they wore. But these wolf riders who belonged to Goddard didn't realize what kind of role the humans in front of them were. In their eyes, the human troops wearing gorgeous armor were all just for show. They had charged all the way from the borders of the kingdom to here, and all the troops they encountered along the way were as fragile as thin paper under the charge of the wargs. Compared to Roddy, who was standing on the elk behind them and shooting continuously, they were more willing to face these fragile human riders. So looking at Sodeler, who had already raised his longsword and was using battle aura to form a clone, the leader of the orcs shouted, "Kill them! Leave this place!" 3 seconds later, this orc, who had been grinning hideously, had his head chopped off with a frozen expression on his face. Kill! The Dragon Spear Knights had never been afraid of a head-on charge, Not to mention that these orcs were already an arrow at the end of its flight and didn't even have decent armor on them. With just one charge, 11 of the 12 orcs were cut down, and the remaining orc's arm was chopped off. After passing through the line of defense, his face was full of shock, and he widened his eyes in disbelief. And just as he turned his head to look at his companions who were left with broken limbs, an arrow that fell from the sky directly pierced through his throat, causing this orc to fall to the ground, dead. Standing on a tree, Natha slowly put down her short bow and looked at the battlefield before her with a grave expression. The orcs were ultimately stronger than the humans. Although they were protected by armor, 3 of the dragon spear knights were still injured, and 2 of their warhorses lost their mobility. Although no one died, bone fractures were unavoidable. A veteran even had a large cut on his stomach, causing blood to flow continuously and even drip down the horse's abdomen to the ground. However, his expression didn't change at all, and he continued to hold his longsword tightly as he followed the team. At this moment, under the lead of Titus and Wellington, Sally's 40 private troops had finally arrived. Looking at the unstoppable army in front of them, many people secretly took a deep breath. There were many things that couldn't be achieved through simple training. Military discipline, willpower, and outstanding strength could only be obtained through the tempering of countless battles. Treat the wounded. Get into a defensive formation and be careful of other enemies. Roddy jumped off the train king and loudly gave orders. Akasha quickly rushed over to save the wounded. Sally glanced at her and also began to cast divine spells, unwilling to be outdone. Naife, on the other hand, stared blankly at the orcs in the forest who were pierced with arrows, not knowing what to say. She witnessed the scene of Roddy killing 18 orcs from afar. When they fought together in the magic training field, Roddy gave Naife the feeling that he was a rookie who was trying hard to learn magic. But on the battlefield, those countless times of practice made Roddy have such terrifying destructive power. Such a scene had a great impact on Naife, who was only 14 years old. She had never thought that magic could have such a great effect in a war. Compared to Roddy's powerful ability to reverse the situation, she had only sat on the horse and cast a few simple magic spells from beginning to end, and even made a few mistakes in the process. She suddenly regretted that she didn't practice as hard as Roddy, but now she couldn't help at all. Naife. I'm here, brother Roddy. Seeing that Roddy was looking for her, Naife had an indescribable feeling in her heart. But she never thought that Roddy would rush over and directly carry her. Brother Roddy, what's going on? What are you doing? Roddy didn't say much. He raised his hand and waved to the distance, and the needle-tail sand cone standing on the tree trunk fluttered its wings and landed on the ground. Because the tree trunk was a little high, the Kata duck finally landed on its butt. It looked a little miserable, but he didn't care about this. He pulled the buckle on the saddle of the needle-tail sand cone and put Naife on it. At the same time, he said in a low voice, "Now return to Elson City. Pay attention to the shield along the way to keep warm, do you hear me?" The appearance of the orcs had completely disrupted Roddy's plan. The situation was out of his control. The first thing he thought of was to make sure that Naife was far away from these dangers. Reaching out his hand to smooth Naife's hair, Roddy continued, "Go back and tell Mother that I'm safe here, so she doesn't have to worry." The words were stuck in his throat. Naife's eyes were red as she pulled the buckle and jumped down. Asterisk, 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 asterisk distance. Note 1. The distance between the tail of the arrow and the bow window after the arrow is pulled. Roundness. Note 2. This refers to the hardness of the arrow shaft. The higher the weight of the bow, the harder the arrow used. Chapter 483. I'm not leaving. Naife was not stupid. She knew that Roddy was trying to get her out of danger, but she also knew that she could not leave. Ducky was the eye of the team. If she left like this, everyone would be in a more dangerous situation. I can help. I won't run away. He said everything is safe for her mother. Naifei did not believe that the forest was safe at this time. Although this group of orcs was dead, who could guarantee that there would not be another group? What if there were hundreds or thousands of them? Akasha, Natha, Sally, Sodaler, none of them left the battlefield. If she left like this, her mother would definitely worry about Roddy's safety. She was mature and understood these things, but she did not know how important she was in Roddy's heart. Go now, listen to me. Roddy took a deep breath. His hands were slightly trembling. He thought that his plan was foolproof, but it put Naifei in danger again. How could he let her stay here? I'm not leaving. Why do you want me to go back? You can't do this. Naifei shook her head. Listen to me. Go now. Roddy had always been obedient to Naifei, but his attitude was extremely tough at this time. He reached out to push Naifei back, but she waved her hand and said, I'm not leaving. Why do you want me to go? Why don't they go? Listen to me, because you are still a child. I don't want you to. I'm not a child anymore. Naifei finally could not help but shout. Her words made everyone look at her. Sally, Akasha, and Natha all looked at Roddy with a complicated expression. It was not because of his toughness, but because at this moment, he suddenly lost his soul. Naifei thought that Roddy would continue to say something, but when she looked up, she saw him standing there like a statue. Roddy opened his mouth slightly. There was surprise, astonishment, and guilt in his eyes, but there was no anger after being refuted. Naifei felt a little flustered. She suddenly realized that she had done something wrong. Big brother Roddy. Sorry, Roddy murmured. After a few seconds, he repeated, I'm sorry. He reached out to help Naifei down from the duck's back. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he pursed his lips. After that, Roddy turned around and called Akasha over. He reminded her to take care of Naifei's safety, took a deep breath, turned around and walked away. At the same time, he issued a series of orders to the surrounding people. Which bishop is leading the Rose Cross team? Bishop Rubens put me in charge of this operation. Tell your men to stop chasing the enemy. Sodaler. Those who can get on a horse don't just lie down. Those who can't move use high-grade healing potions. I didn't spend so much money just to let you guys carry the load. Priests, save your mana. Don't worry about minor injuries. Let them bandage themselves. You guys, haven't you learned battlefield first aid? Roddy seemed to have returned to his usual calm demeanor, but his words were filled with sarcasm. To others, this was not surprising. After all, it was normal for people to be in a bad mood during an emergency. But those who were familiar with Roddy knew that this was definitely not normal. But no one would really stand up and say anything. Naifei bit her lips and did not dare to speak. Akasha dragged her to the back of the team. Sally silently came over with a water bag. She carefully used divine magic to heal his red and swollen fingers from pulling the bowstring too fast. Natha put away the short bow and quiver, and once again mounted the needle-tail sand awl and patrolled the surroundings. Baron Roddy, the leader of those heretics has not been, are you blind? Those are orcs. Orc-wolf riders. Chasing a few useless heretics at this time? Is there something wrong with your brain? The Rose Cross bishop who was scolded by Roddy wanted to retort. But looking at the orcs that were shot to death by Roddy, he wisely decided to remain silent. If he was scolded, then so be it. At this time, the battlefield was still rather chaotic. The Viper Cross team had already fled in all directions. There was no time to chase after them. Viscount Siena's private army suffered heavy casualties. Only a few prisoners of war were left at the back of the team. The Rose Cross team had a total of 103 people. 71 of them were infantrymen and 32 were cavalry. Sally's side had 35 cavalry, including the 2 Grand Knights. Roddy and Sodeler's side had 47 barbarian infantrymen and 32 dragon lancers. There was a total of 128 infantrymen and 99 cavalry. The rest were all injured. The fleeing heretics and private army left behind many horses. These horses were collected and used to transport the injured. So the team was not much of a burden. But the problem in front of them was very clear. Roddy did not know how many orcs were in this forest. So at this time, he had to immediately prepare for battle. Get the team organized. Each team has a captain in charge. This is a critical time. I don't want to hear nonsense. The orcs have attacked our kingdom, so this is now a war. After the teams were reorganized, Roddy represented Sally and Duke as the commander-in-chief. His speech was also concise and comprehensive. Everyone only needs to know one thing. To deal with the orcs, if you find them in the forest, kill them in the forest. If you find them in the gutters, drown them in the gutters. Understood? Understood. The dragon lancers answered in unison. The other teams did not seem to have the habit of answering like this. They responded sparsely. Roddy did not expect the other soldiers to be able to command them. He simply let the majority of the Holy War Army take on logistics duties. They carried the injured and stayed at the back of the team. The Dragon Lancers opened the way in front. Titus and Wellington's troops were left in the middle as reserves. Sodeler, did you find that guy? Sienna had been caught by the orcs when they were escaping. But now, when they cleaned up the battlefield, there was no trace of him. Obviously, this enemy of Sodeler had taken advantage of the chaos to hide somewhere. If you can't find him, there is no need to look for him. Sodeler shook his head and slowly exhaled. The most important thing is to deal with the orcs. As for him, I will find him sooner or later. Although he knew that if a snake was not killed, it would be harmed, now that the orcs had appeared, Sodeler had no choice but to put down his hatred and turn to face the existence that threatened the kingdom. Roddy also breathed a sigh of relief. Both of their calm expressions hid an indescribable emotion. But with the war at hand, they did not have the time to sigh. After a simple rest, they quickly led the team away from the battlefield. And just 10 minutes after the team left, an arm suddenly reached out from a narrow hole under a soil slope. Damn it! Damn it! This seemed to be the cave of some kind of animal. There was an indescribable stench in it. After Viscount Sienna climbed out with difficulty, he lay on the ground and vomited for a long time. Obviously, he had endured to his limit in the cave. But the hatred in his heart made him ignore the physical pain. Sienna climbed up. His originally gorgeous armor was now covered in all kinds of rotten mud and feces. But he did not care at all. He just clenched his teeth and lowered his head to search the battlefield. Monthly votes appreciated. Book Friend 208-16264, Heartless Sect, Sword Emperor Lionhaken, Femute 1983. Thanks for the support. Enhanced Barrett. Chapter 484. Roddy had no interest in collecting the corpses of his enemies, so he left the wolf riders' corpses on the battlefield. The sight of severed limbs all over the ground almost made Sienna vomit again, but he forced himself to hold it in. Not only that, he even picked up a blunt knife and started chopping off the orcs' heads with all his might. After chopping off 4 heads, Sienna threw the knife away and strung the heads together with a rope. Then, he got his bearings and carefully prepared to leave the forest. But the more Sienna walked, the more humiliated he felt. At first, he walked briskly, but then he started jogging. He only wanted to leave the forest as soon as possible so that he could carry out his plan. He swore that he would make the other party pay for everything that had happened in the past few minutes. But not long after, he coincidentally bumped into Viscount Unruh's team. Seeing Unruh's unnatural expression, Sienna knew that this was not a coincidence. But he was too lazy to ask what Unruh had done. He waved the orc heads in his hand and said, Viscount and Rue, my team was attacked by the orcs. It took us a lot of effort to fight our way out, but the forest is too dangerous now. We have to leave immediately. Fortunately, Unruh did not encounter any orcs along the way. He had only come to see if Roddy was dead. But when he saw Sienna's disheveled appearance and the orc heads in his hand, he immediately realized that something big had happened. He quickly got Sienna to wipe his face and mounted his horse. Viscount Sienna, you are indeed the heir of the Milner family. Your skills are. Sienna was not interested in listening to Unruh's flattery. He waved his hand and said, let's not talk about this for now. Let's return to the city as soon as possible. My guards and magicians have all died. We are not enough to deal with the orcs. What the hell, why are there orcs here? He cursed the orcs in a jumbled sentence. His demeanor calmed Viscount Unruh down. The two of them quickly fell silent and headed out of the forest, each with their own ulterior motives. Outside the Da Vinci forest, the campsite of the nobles was now covered in blood. The originally neat fence was crooked and broken on the ground. Every noble's warhorse had been chopped into pieces and was being eaten by dozens of werewolves. The red wine and fruits prepared for the nobles were brought in front of Warlord Goddard. After crushing 3 wooden chairs, the sturdy beastman chose to rest on a wooden stake. His blood-stained battle axe was placed beside him, and his half-naked muscles were covered in sweat. Bah! Picking up the wine glass and taking a sip, the overseer spat the wine on the ground and cursed. What are these humans doing? Are they treating sour water as treasures? Beside the bright red wine were the corpses of more than 10 noble servants. Goddard did not care about the stench of blood. He picked up a few sour fruits and threw them into his mouth. After chewing a few times, he nodded in satisfaction and continued eating. The humans in this camp had already suffered an inhumane massacre. It wasn't that there were no survivors among them, but the situation of these survivors was perhaps even worse than death. 7 or 8 noble girls or young women were currently being raped by Goddard's personal guards. Their throats had long been hoarse, but no one would feel pity for them at this time. In the eyes of the beastmen, humans were even food, and these playthings obviously had no right to bargain. The bosom friends, who were still chatting with Catherine a few hours ago, were now rolling their eyes. Some of them were even gradually losing their breath under the continuous impact. However, the beastmen riding on their bodies did not care whether the people below them were dead or alive. They only cared about venting out the desire that they had been suppressing for a long time. This was the war between the alien races. It was cruel, and nothing else. Goddard was not very interested in this. After eating a lot of fruits, he frowned slightly at the people in front of him. He spat out a piece of fruit skin and asked, "Even now, you still have doubts about me?" "Of course not. I'm only here to help His Majesty confirm some things." The black-robed beastman standing in front of Goddard bowed in apology. "If I have offended you, please forgive me, Warlord." His identity was not difficult to guess. Even Goddard could clearly recognize the aura of death. The His Majesty he mentioned was undoubtedly Augustine. There was no coincidence in this sudden massacre. All the steps were carried out according to Augustine's plan like a precise clock. Goddard knew that he was just a butcher's knife in the hands of the other party, but he did not care about being used. As long as this surprise attack was successfully completed, he would return to the grasslands with the armor and heads of countless nobles. And with these achievements, Sauron's position would certainly not be as secure as before. The beastman's style was simple and crude. It was fine to use them, but they only needed to give them certain benefits. Without the undead gathering the nobles behind them, how could he obtain such great achievements? Even so, seeing the black-robed beastman in front of him, Goddard still felt very uncomfortable. He slowly got up and said, "What else do you need to confirm?" These human nobles could not withstand a single blow. The ones I killed casually are all over there. Do you need to go and take a look? The towering warlord pointed to a small pile of human heads in the distance. These were not private soldiers or servants, but all famous nobles of the kingdom of Karen. They were still talking and laughing at the banquet yesterday, but now only their heads were left on the grass. TSK, Warlord Goddard is really brave. The black-robed orc did not stand on ceremony. He walked around the heads and looked at them, muttering to himself, "Oh, isn't this Count Balachi? He's the one who's most afraid of death. I didn't expect him to not be able to escape. Baron Panini? The dignified Lord of Pacaro was also killed. How interesting. Many of them were famous lords, but from today onwards their names would be completely erased from the kingdom. His Majesty will remember everything you have done today. There will definitely be more resources sent to you in the future." He seemed to really only come to confirm these heads. After bowing slightly, he slowly retreated to the side and said no more. The orcs who were enjoying themselves to the fullest were dashing forward on their white bodies, but the pained screams and begging for mercy just now were nowhere to be seen. Goddard cast them a glance, snorted, and said, "Weak humans," before he turned around and walked towards his warg. "Quickly replenish your strength. We are not here to enjoy the scenery. I want to see everyone gather here before sunset, and then take down that city. Yes, Warlord." But as soon as the reply came, a few wolf riders rushed out from the edge of the forest, bringing news that made Goddard narrow his eyes. "A human team killed our warriors. The teams of Zagreb, Delta, and Merger were all wiped out. Heh! Among the humans, there are fellows who dare to resist?" Goddard was a little surprised, but his expression did not change much. If the humans were only being slaughtered one-sidedly, it would be too boring for the war like him. So, he immediately picked up his battle axe and jumped on his wolf. "Blow the horn. Gather the nearby teams and crush them with me. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.